Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of Starship Flight 9. I'm Will Robinson Smith, and you're watching live coverage jointly between Spaceflight Now and LabPadre for the 9th integrated test flight of SpaceX's Starship program. We are currently T-minus 1 hour, 55 minutes, 37 seconds away from the liftoff of this more than 400-foot tall rocket from Pad A down there at Starbase, Texas. Texas's newest incorporated city. Of course, as there is with every Starship flight, there is lots of anticipation and high ambitions for each mission as SpaceX is continuing to push the envelope for the development in this iterative program. A lot of focus, though, on today's mission going as advertised, though, since the last two times we saw Starship fly, the ship upper stage never made it through its full mission profile. It failed to complete the first burn, and so the Block 2 of the ship upper stage has never had the chance to really showcase all it has to offer as SpaceX continues to develop and work towards the version of Starship that will be rapidly reusable, as SpaceX hopes it will be for its ambitions, not only in the loops of the Artemis program, but also, of course, for, as SpaceX likes to say, making life multiplanetary, which we expect to hear more from SpaceX leadership and its founder, Elon Musk, following the launch of Starship Flight 9. For those who had maybe not been super keenly plugged in throughout the afternoon, there was originally going to be a talk from Mr. Musk ahead of the launch of this mission back at around 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, but plans shift as they sometimes do, and so now the talk is scheduled for after all of this is done and dusted. Currently looking at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central for the company talk to talk about making life multiplanetary. As you take a look down at the tank farm there, you can see the farm is starting to come alive as SpaceX is less than 2 hours away from launching this mission. Current timeline has things really getting going around 1 hour and 15 minutes out from flight. That's when the SpaceX flight director will conduct the readiness poll and verify that they are go for the start of prop load, with the tanking process beginning with the loading of liquid oxygen on the ship upper stage, followed by liquid methane on ship 35. That'll be followed by booster fueling about 41.5 minutes before takeoff, and booster locks, the last big milestone to begin on the fueling side of things, beginning at about just shy of 36 minutes before takeoff. I want to thank all of you for joining, whether you are here with us coming from the LabPadre community or here at Spaceflight Now. If you haven't already, you could do us all a big favor and help with this big live launch coverage by liking whichever stream you're watching and sharing it with your friends, families, strangers who are interested in all things space and spaceflight as we cruise on through the count. We've got a lot to talk about, and we are fortunate to be joined by a couple of great voices in the space coverage community. I want to start first with someone who actually has a fairly recent video that was published on the changes that have been made after the Flight 7 mishap, also looking deeply into Flight 8 and keenly watching Flight 9 to see what goes right and what goes wrong. Mr. Zach Golden of CSI Starbase. Sir, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Glad to be here. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited for today's flight and, hoping for some success. This is going to be pretty awesome. I imagine we'll get into some of the stuff you just mentioned as far as Flight 7 and 8. But yeah, looking to see if the changes that were made between flights 7 and 8 end up, or sorry, between flights 8 and 9 actually end up helping out the second stage vehicle. Fingers crossed, because there's lots of important things that need to be taken care of as far as, making sure the TPS tiles are doing what they need them to do. And they really can't get to that until the ship makes it past SECO. So fingers crossed that we get past that point so we can actually have some fun today.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are not following Zach and his work here on YouTube, you can find it just by searching for CSI Starbase. And big congrats, Zach, on crossing 100,000 subscribers, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a while, but I've only got like 29 episodes out, so I feel pretty good about that. If I had like 300 in 3 years, then I would be pretty sad that it took this long. But it's a long time coming, but feels nice to finally reach that point. So yeah, on to even bigger things, hopefully.
Absolutely. Nice to have that silver YouTube plaque, though, as a reminder of where you've come from so far. So, again, congrats.
Thank you.
And want to welcome in our other special guest who is joining this LabPadre Spaceflight Now commentary. For those who have been following Spaceflight Now for some time, you'll remember his voice from not just Starship coverage, but many, many years before that. Previous editor here at Spaceflight Now, and now a reporter over at Ars Technica, Mr. Stephen Clark. Wonderful to have you back on with the commentary. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Will. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so we're obviously going to be talking all about, as we were just discussing, Flights 7, Flight 8, the preparations for Flight 9, and what it all means to all the people for whom it is affecting. Want to start with you, Zach. As we've been watching the progress towards Flight 9, actually want to step back and talk a little bit more about sort of what's been happening around the physical launch itself and some of the changes that have been happening here at Starbase, as not just this launch tower and this pad have been getting ready for Flight 9, but there's been quite a bit of buzz all around Starbase, not just with the incorporation itself, but some important physical changes. So maybe if we want to start over by the Star Factory, where some of the walls have been coming down as preparations for the Gigafactory have been in the works. If you want to start there and some of the big reasons for changes like that we've been seeing here at Starbase.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully we can probably get a view of Rover 1 camera as well as we go through some of this. So at the Star Factory, which is mostly the actual structure itself, has been complete for quite a while now. I would say probably about 6 months or 5 to 6 months at this point. But there's a lot of stuff still going on the inside. So while it may look like it's finally up and running, there's still a lot of work that it takes to actually get all of the actual workstations inside of there going. So over the last few months, they've been constructing all of those unique workstations at the Sanchez site. So each of the rotary like welding stations and all of the specialized stations for each section of the ship and booster are all being constructed at the Sanchez site. And then one by one, they roll them into the factory. It's actually quite interesting because they use that space at the Sanchez site instead of actually constructing them in place inside of the factory. I think it's probably a sign of how things have changed to some degree. So in the past, I believe they would probably have just constructed those inside of the factory, but that involves a lot of cutting and welding occasionally. So, and by welding, I mean hand welding versus a lot of machine welding that they do with robots inside of the factory. So in general, I think they are trying to keep that space a lot cleaner than in the past, as far as, the actual factory floor. It's still a ways off from being the typical aerospace manufacturing facility where everybody's walking around in clean suits and all of that. But they're slowly stepping their way up to reaching that level. I don't think they'll ever be quite there because they don't necessarily feel like they have a reason to. It's still cool. The fact that they are building all this stuff outside kind of gives us an idea of not only what type of stations they're working on at each time. So like, for a few months, we saw them building the ship nose cone workstations, and then we saw the booster aft sections and the ship aft sections, and now the just normal ring sections. It gives us an idea of how many of each of those stations they have, and really lets us see how that production capacity is actually ramping up over time. So sometimes, because of the fact that we aren't able to actually see the inside of the factory, you don't really know what their production rate is until you start to see components move out of the factory and move into the mega bay, the 2 megabays to be stacked. So seeing that stuff from the outside gives us an idea of where they are in that process. And I don't know, I would just off a random guess, I would say they're probably about somewhere between 50% and 3/4 of the way through outfitting the inside of that star factory. I do believe that at some point today, we were hoping it would be this morning, that we would get an actual view of the inside of the factory when Elon did his presentation, but that has been delayed until after the launch. So we'll have to stand by and hopefully we get some views then. But yeah, I imagine things are looking pretty good inside of there. And, in preparation, as you mentioned, for the Gigabay, they did need to clear up some space in front of the Star Factory. So that included completely demolishing the high bay, which was a long time coming, in my opinion. I've been kind of like plotting on its demise for the past 2 years, pretty much. But they've continued to find reasons to keep it up and running for quite a while. They most frequently used it for stacking nose cone sections onto the payload sections. And then anytime they had like a test tank or a unique structure that they were constructing, they would do it inside of that building. And that kind of helped prolong its life for a bit longer. But they've finally finished bringing down the last 3 remaining skeleton walls of that structure. And they are currently, if we were to take a look at Rover 1, you could see just a huge pile of structural steel out there that they're slowly shipping away. And once that's complete, they will actually begin foundation work on the Gigabay. So that also required them to make some modifications to the front of the Star Factory and remove we call it it's a little hard to describe it, but it's a little wedge-shaped component of the building that was right on the front left corner of it, which was basically like a hallway that allowed them to move nose cone sections out of that building. And they ended up removing that and basically having the entire side of the building be flush. And they installed a new door and basically creating space for that Gigabay. There is a chance that this could be the beginning of the end as far as tank watching goes. Actually being able to see components move out of the Star Factory and into stacking. So, our access to this stuff is kind of diminished over time. They used to actually store a lot of these ring sections outside for days at a time, which allowed us to see them from the air and from the ground and get a really good idea of like how all of these components were constructed. But now with the Star Factory completed, the only time we really see them is in the process of moving them from the factory to the bays. And now we're at the potential to lose even more if that Gigafactory ends up butting up against the factory. That will for sure be the case in Florida at the Roberts Road facility. They are more than likely going to attach the Gigabays to the factory, which in all honesty is the ideal way to do it. You don't ever have to worry about, exposure outside. Let's say it's raining or something like that, or you have a dust storm going on when you need to move a component in between those 2 buildings. That's just not ideal because then it requires you to actually clean the inside of those sections before you stack them. So, ideally that would be the way to go. However, for our own viewing pleasure, we would probably prefer for that not to happen. So as you can see in this view, you have those 4 doors right there. And in order to actually keep production going, I don't think the Gigabay is going to be able to actually go up against the Star Factory, because if you have construction, you basically have to move those ring sections through the construction zone each time you wanted to reach Megabay 1 and Megabay 2. So had they constructed both the Star Factory and the Gigabays at the same time, then it would be reasonable to actually try and join those two structures together, because you're not really worrying about competing with manufacturing and construction. But right now, in order to keep manufacturing and assembly going, I think it's unlikely that we'll see the Gigabay attached to that building. And I got my fingers crossed that's the case. It would be nice if we just have a hallway from the Gigabay over to Megabay 2. I do think eventually the Megabay 1, which is just out of view on the left side of the screen, I'm pretty positive that one will be demolished, probably sometime next year. Potentially, they may remove Megabay 2 as well. However, it's more likely that that one will stay. I think that one will probably end up being like the post-flight retrofit area. So like if they need to bring ships back in and change out tiles or engines or anything like that, I think that'll be the post-flight building. And then in the Gigabay will actually be manufacturing and like storage. So all of that is, of course, speculation, but and ideally for us to be able to continue to gather as much information on the R&D side of things, I hope that's what they end up doing. So sorry for that long-winded answer there, but that's the kind of the way my mind has been thinking about all of this as we were watching this situation develop.
Hey, well, we wanted you on the stream for your mind and for your thoughts, so no apologies necessary on that. Just want to take a moment to thank a couple of people that are supporting us right now with our live stream coverage, as we're just about an hour and 40 minutes away from the planned liftoff. Want to thank Peter for $100 Venmo tip on the LabPadre side. Really appreciate that. Also on the Spaceflight Now side of the coin, want to thank Super Tech Boy for a $2 super chat. Also welcoming in a few new channel members, John Harper. And thanks to Gunnar S. for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that. If you'd like to be a part of the conversation, we are monitoring our respective live chats from both Spaceflight Now and LabPadre. So we'd love to factor in your comments to our coverage today. If you have a comment or question for any of us that are on this stream that we can hopefully answer to the best of our abilities, we'll love to make you a part of this live launch coverage. And of course, the YouTube Super Chat feature will not only help you be a part of the show in real time, but also support the hard work that we do here, both at LabPadre as well as at Spaceflight Now. And so, my friends, any chipping in that you can do is always greatly appreciated. And of course, quick and easy way to help out both channels is just by liking and subscribing to both, as well as to CSI Starbase. And be sure to follow Steve over at Ars Technica and all of the work that he and his colleague Eric Berger are doing. Speaking of which, want to bring you in, Eric, Eric, good grief, Steven, want to bring you in to talk about some of the work that you and your colleague Eric Berger have been doing over at Ars. Obviously covering much more than just the Starship program, but given all the eyeballs that are on this mission and the timing of this launch coming up right against the potential U.S. Senate vote for Jared Isaacman to become the next NASA administrator, how much more elevated do you think this mission is for SpaceX to really get this all right this go around?
Well, I think it's a crucial time for Starship, given the things you just talked about, the political landscape that we're in with the pending confirmation of Jared Isaacman as the NASA administrator, as well as the budget fight that is going to be playing out over the next few months in Congress. So obviously the skinny budget that the Trump administration released a few weeks ago kind of at a high level offers a blueprint of the direction that the administration wants NASA to go, and it will be heavily, if implemented, it would be heavily reliant on commercial heavy lift and super heavy lift systems like Starship to replace the Space Launch System and Orion spacecraft, which are queued up for cancellation in that budget request. However, Congress still needs to weigh in on that budget, and there is a lot of support in Congress, although I wouldn't say ironclad support anymore in Congress for things like the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft. And if Starship is viewed as unreliable or on the wrong track, there may be that may strengthen the arguments of some of those in Congress who want to keep the Space Launch System around a little while longer. Of course, NASA or the Trump administration wants the SLS to remain an active program for the next two missions, Artemis 2 and 3, and then cancel it, and then start relying on these heavy lift systems like Starship, potentially Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket for missions out to the moon and eventually onto Mars. That's one part of it. The other part is this is coming at a very critical moment from an engineering and technical perspective. So most of our viewers know that the last two Starship test flights failed. They did not reach their goals, and really probably was the most significant setback that SpaceX has had in a long time, a decade or more. And this flight hopefully will put the program back on track. We'll probably get into a discussion later about some of the technical causes for those issues on flights 7 and 8. But flight 7, of course, the investigation found the most likely cause was for the early shutdown of the Starship engines were these intense vibrations that were more extreme than predicted. And then on flight 8, there was a hardware issue in one of the Raptor engines on Starship that caused it to shut down, and eventually it was a cascading series of failures that led to the loss of control of Starship. So I'm not sure. I'm sure SpaceX engineers are fairly confident that they've resolved the vibration issue that they had on Flight 7, but I'm not entirely sure that they can say that with 100% certainty, because the Flight 8 started having problems with the Raptor engine at an earlier point in flight than the vibration resonance issue started emerging on Flight 7. So it's going to be a series of milestones on this flight. You want to see them get past the 5.5 minute point, which is when they started having trouble with the Raptor engine on Flight 8. Later on in flight, around the 8-minute point is when they had the issue, lost control in Flight 7. So we want to get past that. And then, of course, the big thing is the reentry, and assuming the Starship reaches its planned trajectory and gets out over the Indian Ocean and begins the reentry, we'll see how these new tiles perform. And I think that's kind of the holy grail of this flight, is to get to that point, because engineers, the heat shield engineers at SpaceX, have been patiently waiting, maybe impatiently waiting, for the last several months for an opportunity to see how these new tiles and this new heat shield design fares during reentry, and they haven't had a chance to do so until hopefully today, if the Starship propulsion system works as designed.
We'll see how it all unfolds in time. Before we get too far away from the Artemis part of the equation, though, Stephen, I just want to pop over quickly to our view of the vehicle assembly building. As you can see just to the right of the Launch Control Center, the LCC, the Mobile Launcher 2 continues to climb its way skyward. I believe the 8th module out of 10 has now been stacked onto there. As you know, the skinny budget does have the SLS and Orion pieces of Artemis phasing out after Artemis 3, but at the time being, none of those contracts, like the one with Bechtel, have been canceled at this point in time. So, you know, obviously a little bit of a crystal ball question, and I hate to do that to you, but, you know, what do you think would be the future for a lot of this hardware? As, you know, we can see some of it here at the Kennedy Space Center right now. Obviously, a lot of pieces of future Artemis missions for the SLS rocket are in flow, both at the Star Center for Lockheed Martin and the Orion spacecraft, at the Michoud Assembly Facility down in Mississippi or in Louisiana, and the Stennis Space Center, obviously, you know, standing by for future RS-25 engines for the SLS core stage. You know, what do you think is going to happen to all that equipment if it ends up getting mothballed?
I wish I knew. Well, I don't, I don't know. I will say that I think the piece of hardware you're looking at there, Mobile Launcher 2, is probably first on the chopping block. It's very low chance it's ever going to be used for a space launch system flight, I would say at this point. The other things you mentioned really kind of depend on where the budget negotiations go in the next few months. Of course, we may end up with a continuing resolution out of Congress, in which case the baseline, if there's no movement, will be to continue funding after the into this fiscal year, into fiscal year 2026, which begins in October, at the current levels, which would maintain these programs for a period of time into the fall, into the winter, even into next year. We didn't get a fiscal year 2025 budget until well, it was a continuing resolution. If the pattern sticks, it's going to be hard to really cancel these programs because it will literally require an act of Congress, and they have a lot higher priorities, frankly, on their plate than you know. Even a program as expensive as the Space Launch System is just a very small fraction of the federal budget. So I think these programs do have a sense of inertia. They're going to keep moving forward. I would be surprised if we see any sort of stop work order on Orion or Space Launch System for Artemis 4 or 5 or anything like that. I wouldn't be shocked if you see a stop work order or something with the Mobile Launcher 2, to be honest, in the coming months. That seems to me more likely to happen. But I think that we'll have to wait and see. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted, but it's probably the answer you expected. Will is I'm not sure how it's going to shake out if the programs are canceled beyond Artemis 3. I don't think there's a lot of utility for a lot of this hardware. It's all purposely designed for the Space Launch System. Some of the RS-25 engines may find a use either in an experimental fashion or on a future launch vehicle. The Orion spacecraft potentially, Lockheed Martin could try to commercialize that in some manner and keep that alive. That could be one way this goes. The Space Launch System, I don't see any future for if it is canceled beyond Artemis 3.
Yeah, it's quite hard to really put your finger on what exactly will happen, but I think that's all very good prognosis for what is quite possible. Pivoting our eyes from the VAB to another part of the Kennedy Space Center, we are also watching out at Launch Complex 39A, where it's SpaceX keeping busy over here on the Space Coast. You've got a Falcon 9 rocket that, as we've been beginning our broadcast here, rolled out to the pad, and you can see there is currently in a horizontal configuration. It'll be brought vertical in the next several hours ahead of tomorrow morning's planned launch of another batch of Starlink satellites, which will be the final mission that's planned ahead of the upcoming private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. That is Axiom Mission 4, or AX4, currently targeting a launch on June 8th, heading up to the space station for a roughly 2-week stay. But of course, germane to our conversation today is not necessarily what is at the heart of the camera view here, but it was just off to the right-hand side, the Starship tower that has been receiving quite a bit of work over the last few months in preparation for Starship flights here. Now, back during some of the previous integrated flight tests from down in southern Texas, down at Starbase, there was discussion about potentially getting Starship launches from here in Florida, potentially as early as the end of this year. Zach, I'll go to you for the start on this part of the conversation. Given the setbacks that we've seen with the Starship program in, working through the upper stage issues, based off of how fast you're seeing them move with some of the pieces and work that's being done over on Pad B, do you think it's realistic that this Starship tower could be conceivably active by the end of the calendar year?
Yeah, I think that's pretty likely. Obviously they've gotten the new launch mount in place right now, so there's still a lot of operations that come once they've done that. They, in my opinion, I think rolled it out a little bit sooner than they would have liked to. I think there was some concerns with like crane availability that forced them to install it a little bit earlier before actually fully outfitting it. There's also a possibility that they were up against actual weight constraints with those cranes, and so they couldn't add anything else to the launch mount without lifting it in place first. So as it currently stands, they have about 4 of the 20 hold down arms in place right now, so they still got to add the other 16. They need to install all of the hydraulics for those hold down arms inside of the launch mount. And then the actual gantry structure, which is basically taken over as the launch mount, honestly. The launch mount really only has the hold down arms and the hydraulic system for that, and everything else that used to be in there, the spin start system, the ignition system for the outer 20 engines, all of that has been moved out of the launch mount and into the adjacent gantry structure. So they're making good progress with that. They're working super hard, especially with the delays between flights 8 and 9. They've gotten quite a bit of work done that probably would not have happened otherwise between that time period. So they still have to finish that, installing all of the mechanical systems that feed from the gantry to the booster QDs that will be on top of the launch mount, and also the hydraulic systems that are basically on the outside of the structure and feed into the inside. So they have to join all of those systems together. Obviously get their first tests of that system done. And right here, you can actually see that gantry structure in the foreground of the launch mount right there. I guess we can actually pivot also to what is going on in this video, which is the basically structural verification test for the chopsticks. So I wish I would have gotten a count of the mass for these, but I think that right there is 400 tons. I believe that's 4 of the larger water bags right there. So they basically performed this test. They did another one this past week where they, instead of having them shortly suspended from those chopsticks, they were actually probably about 70 meters suspended from them below. So really long cables that they had suspended from the chopsticks, and they added much more weight onto those. So I would say the test that we just saw right there was essentially what they would need to do if they were planning to catch the ship on this attempt. That weight right there is about what you would test for the ship. They did, like I said, end up adding a lot more mass after this with the second test. And I would say now they're probably certified for both the ship and booster. So they have the chopsticks pretty much good to go. The one thing that's still missing would be the actual ship QD structure, which, as you can see, is on pad A is attached directly to the ship QD. That does not exist on pad B right now. It's been really just sitting at the Sanchez site for months without too much happening. I do believe they have finally started to make some progress on that, which we'll probably see in next week's flyover. But it's a bit of a mystery why they've kind of not been putting too much effort into getting that done. But that is definitely a big thing that still is remaining. So beyond that, most of the flame trench is done. They're still connecting a lot of the water systems. The launch mount has about half of the manifolds that supply the deluge plate that's on top of the launch mount. So basically, I call it the booster bidet system. Same thing that's on pad A, except for pad B, it's on top of the launch deck instead of below the structure. And about half of those manifolds are connected, and they still need to run the actual main water lines to those manifolds. The water manifolds, or the water lines that run from the water tank farm to the flame bucket underneath, those are mostly connected. I believe they probably still have some work going on in the actual flame trench. But beyond that, they are currently taking a little bit of pause, obviously, with today's launch, but they're working on the area in front on either side of the openings of the trench. So they're actually basically I'm creating the secondary pad, I guess you can call it. So when the all that exhaust is flowing out of the trench, you basically have two different pressure zones that exist on the surface and above, where the plume is actually exiting. So it does have the potential to actually lift any concrete that's there off of the ground. And so they're basically drilling a bunch of pilings like they've done for pretty much every structure at the launch site at this point. So they'll be able to tie that in to the actual slope of the flame trench. And that's what they're currently doing right now. So it's two separate pads that are on either side of the trench that they're working on currently. The actual walls of the trench are complete. Most of the plumbing from the tank farm to the launch tower and launch mount are nearing completion. Another big thing that they're still working on is the actual water supply system for the deluge. They have all the tanks in place. They still need the gas generation system, which actually forces that water out. So that's something they're still working on. I think overall, we're probably looking at, I would say 4 to 6 months before it's ready. I'm pretty sure in today's broadcast, they'll probably give us a timeline that's quicker than that. But I don't know, just based on watching this stuff so much over the last few years, they don't seem to be moving at the pace that would be required to pull it off any faster than that. When they were trying to get Pad A back operational after Flight 1, that was insanely fast work that was going on there. They're kind of nearing that right now, but they're not quite moving that fast. So I don't personally see end of the summer being a reality. But I do think that potentially they could have all of the hold down arms installed, and with the chopsticks being ready, basically in condition to lift a booster and a ship already, theoretically they could at least fully stack a vehicle, for the purpose of just verifying that they can do it. Probably about midsummer, I would say, maybe even within the next month, depending on how fast they get to work with installing those arms. So yeah, it's exciting times coming up. And, on that note, it is very important for them to get that done as quickly as possible, because Pad A, I believe, has a time limit on it. So they've not really said this publicly, but a lot of their actions have kind of like shown this, that there is a hard limit on how many launches they can do on Pad A before the booster bidet system, the deluge plate, becomes, I don't know if you want to say unstable, or basically it reaches a point where they're not comfortable with launching on it anymore. So if you ever have seen any of the aerial photos, you can actually see the imprints of where each of those 33 engines fire onto on that plate. And in my opinion, that's a sign of areas that are being ablated away. So it's constantly a clean surface, because it's constantly a new surface every time they fire on that. So I have a feeling if we were to see like a ground level shot of that plate, that you would actually be able to see an actual indent in that plate from where that material has been burned away. So with that said, they are limited on how much they can actually fire on that pad. And with that said, if they have issues with the booster like they did before this flight, so they actually did their initial static fire test, and then they sent the booster back to the Mega Bay for final outfitting. They brought it back out, and then they destacked it again. Assuming that they did some work to the engines, if they wanted to like retest the booster, that would take away from the amount of launches they're able to perform on that pad. So in my opinion, and again, this is just like speculation, if that was the case, that they ended up swapping something out, they may be in the position where they're kind of like winging it a little bit, because they don't want to take away from like what their ability to continue launching the remaining vehicles. So right now, this is Booster 14's second flight. There's Booster 15, which was recovered on Flight 8.
Yeah.
And Booster 16 and Booster 17. So there's 3 boosters remaining right now. As far as we know, they're definitely not planning on recovering the booster today. From what I've seen online, they don't have permission to do it on the next flight either. So I do think that they'll probably be at least expending boosters for this flight and the next one, possibly until Pad B is online. And, you know, we'll actually see if that ends up being the case, if they end up redoing the launch license again to allow them to catch either booster 16 or booster 15 on the next launch. But yeah, I think there's a combination of things that are leading to that situation. So for one, and you know, what we're kind of getting into the plan for today's launch, which is to actually basically perform an experiment with the booster, which is to fly at a higher angle of attack during its descent after the boost back burn. So what they're saying is that the increased angle of attack will actually reduce the descent speed, which will require less propellant for the landing burn. So when they do that, well, actually, let me back up a little bit, because this is
Zach,
even more going. Yeah.
Before we get too further down, just want to note that we've seen some mid-tower venting, so they're beginning to chill the lines ahead of the go-no-go pull for the start of prop loads. Just want to make our viewers aware that the lines are chilling, seeing that good vent there. And we're just about an hour 15 out from the planned launch of this Flight 9 mission, so just want to note that for the time marker there. But go ahead.
Yeah, so just backing up a little bit as far as booster experiments go. So the first thing that they did with this launch was installed new, basically they covered some of the vents on the hot stage ring. So these vents are basically on the front of the hot stage ring. I don't know if maybe we can even potentially zoom in Rover 2 camera onto that hot stage ring possibly, and actually be able to see this plate that they installed in the front of it. So basically they blocked off the vents on the front of the hot stage ring below the booster, or below the ship QD. And the goal for that was to force the booster to turn a certain way during hot staging. So, you know, really surprising, what we found out was that they were not necessarily able to control that. So this is kind of crazy to me, because I did talk about in an episode when they first introduced hot staging how that mechanism actually works, and I mentioned that was a combination of thrust differential between the ship's engines and the angle of rotation for the grid fins. So by turning the grid fins, you're able to deflect the exhaust plume through the grid fins and actually force it to turn a certain direction. And by let's say igniting the first two RVAC engines first, you're able to push the booster in that direction of those to the front of the ship. As it turns out, that was partially correct, but it's not quite as sophisticated as I was initially thinking it was, thinking that they actually had control of it by saying, okay, ignite these two engines first, this one second, ramp the two in the front up first so that it flips backwards. As it turns out, it's kind of random. So it's a bit odd to me that I'm guessing they don't have that kind of control authority with the timing. And in this in this view right here, you can kind of see that those vents just below the ship QD, you can see that you're not able to see through the hot stage ring. That's the vents that they're using to basically block the flow of exhaust from one of the sea level engines. And by doing that, it will force the booster basically towards the tower from this view. So that basically guarantees that it flips in a certain direction. By doing that, the booster is no longer guessing which direction it's moving. So not necessarily guessing, I would say reacting to it. So I guess from what they've explained in their blog post, they're basically just firing the engines on the ship, and then the booster has to react to whatever happens. And that's something that we've seen on every flight, is that the orientation of the booster has been different every time. And it's weird. I actually thought they were doing experiments to just try different flight profiles with the booster after hot staging, but as it turns out, it was literally just random. So they were actually carrying extra fuel to compensate for that. So like if the booster turns perfectly back to the launch site, then it needs less fuel than if it turns to the side and has to loop around. So by guaranteeing that it's turning a certain direction, you know exactly how much fuel you're using. You don't need to guess as much. You're able to use more fuel for the boost phase of flight, which gets the ship further down range. But by going further down range, you also need more propellant to return back to the launch site. So I think that because of that, that's part of what's going into the experiment today, where they're actually going to attempt to fly at a higher angle of attack during the descent. And the goal for that is to increase, I guess the higher angle of attack will lower the descent speed, which requires less propellant for the initial landing burn. And then from there, they're going to be doing some experiments where they're actually intentionally disabling one of the engines, the center engines on the booster, which will, I think there's a combination of things or reasons why they want to do this. So number one, you're making sure that you have engine out capability. So if you lose one of those 3 engines, which up to this point we've assumed are critical for the landing burn, that you need all 3 of them, they want to know that they can perform a landing with one of those engines out without risking the tower in the process. So that's the reason part of the reason they're not recovering it. That's the official stated reason why they're not recovering the booster, because they would rather perform that test over water instead of at the launch site. So this also kind of leads us into what is going on with the version 3 boosters, which again, like I said, we have 15, 16, and 17 left on the V2 boosters. The V3 boosters, they've started stacking over this past week or so. And with those, the actual engine configuration for the center engines has changed. And it seems like they've kind of biased the angle of the engines in order to allow them to land with 2 engines instead of 3. And I think they kind of are a little bit forced to do that. So they're shedding some mass on the booster thanks to not having all of the heat shielding for the engines. So the booster will be slightly lighter, even though it'll be a little bit taller. The Raptors will be Raptor 3s, ideally, which those will have higher thrust. So because those engines have higher thrust and the vehicle is theoretically slightly lighter, they won't be able to land with 3 engines because that'll just be too much thrust. So they'll need to do it with 2. So they want to have more control authority with 2 engines, which is kind of why they've reconfigured those engines on the V3 boosters from what we've seen. And that is another thing that's part of today's test, is verifying control authority with 2 engines versus 3. So quite a mouthful there, but I think the booster is one of my favorite parts of all of this. Just, it's such a monster in my opinion, and it's just getting even crazier as they continue to upgrade it. But that's going to be one thing to look out for today, is how that booster performs during the landing burn phase. And they'll actually basically bring it to a stop about 200 meters above the water, and then cut the engines, and it'll fall from there and probably explode on contact, which will also be cool to see. But,
Yeah,
but again, back.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to jump in just to say that, it's the way SpaceX described it was going to be a hard splashdown, as opposed to what we've seen, with previous versions of the booster and the ship in the Indian Ocean, where it's been a controlled burn all the way to the point of contact in water. So, yeah, it might be a little bit more energetic once it actually drops from about 200 meters high up.
I'm not gonna lie, I would rather see it come in at like terminal velocity.
Well,
but we're not gonna get to see that. At least, this is a close second to that. But
I'm sure the marine life appreciate a non-terminal velocity booster coming in.
For sure, I agree with that. The splash would be quite intense. I think it still will be from 200 meters up. That's basically would take you taller than the tower. About the height of the tower. Yeah, so that's going to be quite the fall. But again, I think now is the perfect time to do that experiment, because again, not only are you not risking the tower, but you kind of just don't really want these boosters right now. So if there is a hard limit on how many more launches you can perform, with the deluge plate being the limiting factor, then you need to find things to do with these boosters. So if you recover it, The only benefit you get out of recovering it is retrieving the Raptor engines, which is kind of pointless because they're Raptor 2s and you don't really need them anymore because you're moving on to Raptor 3. So at that point, you're basically left with engines that you got to do something with. You're left with an entire booster that you need to scrap manually instead of it happening all at once. I don't know. I think some people would disagree with the method of that, which is probably why they're pairing this with another experiment, in my opinion, just to reduce the amount of comments on that specific topic. Like, okay, you guys are going to just dump it in the sea because you don't want to recover it. No, we're also doing an experiment, which, makes it a little bit less bad from some points of view. But yeah, in general, I think they just don't want these lawn ornaments laying around. If you have a limit on how many more launches you can do on Pad A, then you got to find something to do with these boosters. So yeah, I would say we probably have 3 to 4, maybe 5 at most launches left on Pad A before we start to see them move on to Pad B. And that might even happen sooner, moving on to Pad B, potentially.
Yeah, and it's probably not really feasible to try to get one of these boosters into the Smithsonian, so makes sense for them to move on. Do want to note that SpaceX did confirm just in the last few seconds that the Starship team is go for prop load. So moving along with the timeline for fueling here. Want to go ahead and pause for a moment with the commentary and talk about what we're going to be looking forward to over the course of the next roughly hour as SpaceX gets into the fueling process here. So, of course, they did give the go-ahead for the start of prop load and tanking of this more than 400-foot tall integrated vehicle set to start at T-minus 51 minutes, 37 seconds, again with the liquid oxygen or LOX on the ship upper stage. Ship 35 is on tap today. That'll be followed at the 45, 20-second mark with the fuel for the upper stage, liquid methane. Moving through the count, a few more minutes afterwards. Booster fueling begins with this flight at T-minus 41 minutes, 37 seconds, followed by LOX on the booster at about T-minus 35 minutes and 52 seconds. That'll roll along until about T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds when the engine chill will begin on both the booster and the ship. For those more familiar with the Falcon 9 flights, obviously flying far more frequently, including earlier today and coming up tomorrow morning, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines on a Falcon 9 rocket will begin in the run-up to the launch, but they don't start chilling the upper stage vacuum engine until about a minute and a half into that flight. So just a little bit of difference there. Moving along with the countdown timeline for Starship Flight 9, about 3 minutes, 20 seconds before liftoff. The ship prop load will be complete. Same will be true on the booster stage, about 30 seconds afterwards. In the final 30 seconds, the SpaceX flight director will give their go for launch. The flame deflector, or as Zach likes to refer to it, the rocket bidet system will activate about 10 seconds out. The Raptor ignition sequence begins 3 seconds before takeoff, and as SpaceX likes to say, when we hit T0, excitement is guaranteed. We'll see what excitement SpaceX exactly has in store for us here today, as we're just about an hour and 2 minutes and about 40 seconds away from the liftoff of this Starship Super Heavy integrated launch vehicle. Before we come back to our guests as well, want to thank a few folks who've been supporting our coverage right now. If you haven't already, you could just take a moment to click that like button, share the stream, whether you're watching through LabPadre or through Spaceflight now. It's a quick and easy way to support what we're doing here for this live launch coverage for Starship Flight 9. Also want to thank a few folks for a couple of super chats. Our thanks to Yazada for a $20 super chat, saying thanks for covering this. Foom with a $10 super chat, saying hope all goes well. And Bruce Gordon with a $20 super chat who says, thanks Steven, Zach, LabPadre. For Zach, are you still unconvinced the Flight 7 and 8 failures are not related? And obviously, Zach has published a video really addressing a lot of the things in Flight 7. And I believe the Flight 8 blog, Zach, had not been published by the time that video went live. So If you want to, briefly give your I mean, I know it's hard to be brief on, all the things that came out of the learnings with Flight 8, but maybe your highest level takeaways from, SpaceX making some points to try to distinguish between what happened during Flight 7 and Flight 8.
Yeah, of course. So I guess, if anybody has watched that episode, it was quite a long deep dive into a specific phenomenon known as pogo, which that was a speculative conclusion that was basically related to the information that was given to us by SpaceX. They didn't fully explain, and even with the latest Flight 8 information, they didn't necessarily give us a full explanation. They did, in my opinion, kind of basically lead us to believe that it wasn't pogo, simply by just not mentioning harmonic resonance anymore, and also saying that they essentially solved that issue on Flight 8. So yeah, I guess my main takeaway from that is, if that episode came out after the Flight 8 debrief, I guess it probably would have been a different episode. I probably still would have covered pogo in general, but maybe not spent as much time on it and kind of gotten into other things as well too. But that's just what I do on my channel. I prefer to cover things before official information comes out, because to me that kind of ruins the fun having all of the answers. And so, at the end of the day, my channel is highly speculative in nature, and it always will be. I do personally think that there was felt like a bit of missing information in that debrief, the latest one that they posted a few days ago. So I'm not 100% convinced that there was no pogo involved, at least on Flight 7.
And Zach, just before
like
you
I said,
continue,
seem to have ruled it out for Flight 8. So I don't know. There's a possibility a lot of that stuff is still valid. That's one of those things that I was kind of looking forward to hearing today when Elon was going to do his presentation, was just hoping that potentially he would go into some of that stuff a little bit deeper. But as of right now, we're going to have to wait to see after this launch if that's the case. I kind of got a little bit off track there. Hopefully I answered your question all the way. But yeah, long story short, I do think that there is a good chance that they've addressed that issue. And now they're potentially dealing with a completely different issue. And, as far as what they've said for that post-launch investigation for Flight 8, they mentioned that basically there was a hardware failure on one of the upper stage center engines, which caused inadvertent propellant mixing and ignition, which that alone is very interesting. If that's an internal thing, that breaking on the Raptors that causes fuel to go where it's not supposed to, that alone is interesting. And there's also the potential of inadvertent mixing happening within the actual tank itself, which would mean there was a leak inside of the tank. So in my opinion, that is an extremely vague statement that is open for interpretation, and again, just creates space for speculation. But yeah, they've done extensive ground testing, basically to understand that failure. They said that they've done more than 100 long duration static fire tests at McGregor to try and recreate the same conditions, which is very interesting in my opinion. That would actually be what I would expect to happen if the root cause was what I speculated it to be in that episode. Again, that doesn't mean that's the case, but that's kind of something I was expecting. But basically, what they've said their mitigations are is to essentially fix their preloading on the actual mounting for the the engines. I guess specifically they said additional preload on key joints, which I'm assuming if it relates to leaks, that would mean the actual mounting of the engines onto the aft dome of the ship. So, sometimes, I guess an example of this is if you tighten lug nuts on your car, like when you put the tire back on, you always have to like place it fully back on the ground before you start to torque those nuts down. I kind of think of it similar to that, except in this case, you have a static fire test, a 60-second static fire test, where that's a fairly long burn. Maybe some of those mounting hardware is being loosened up somehow during that test, and they weren't aware of that. And then in flight, that allowed that leak to develop because it wasn't fully tightened down the way it should. So basically, after that test, they're retorquing those mounting points down to ensure that it's basically back in that same condition as it was before the static fire test, which hopefully will allow them to make it through that full duration burn for the ship. They also said that they installed a new nitrogen purge system, which I also find interesting because they said that before the previous flight as well. So I wonder if that's just a repeated line and not necessarily something that's truly new. But yeah, beyond that, they've also made improvements to the propellant drain system. Truthfully, I don't fully understand that one. I've been trying to wrap my mind around that. But the final thing that they mentioned was that a lot of the reliability issues that they've had will be fully resolved with Raptor 3. So I don't know if Raptor 3 is going to have better engine mounts, or if there is in fact some kind of harmonic suppression system, as I mentioned in that episode, that they're planning to incorporate into Raptor 3. So lots of room for speculation. Like I said, I'm really hoping that we end up getting some more information from Elon in that regard.
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see until after Flight 9 when that talk is going to be ready to begin, which I believe, as of the last update to that, is looking like it's going to be around 9 o'clock Eastern Time, barring any future changes to that starting, and of course, probably the outcome of Flight 9 as well. Speaking of Flight 9, we're currently T-minus 53 minutes, 45 seconds away from the opening of the window and the first launch opportunity for this 400-some foot tall rocket to lift off. Ship LOX load is getting ready to begin here in just about 2 minutes. Want to bring back in Stephen Clark, space reporter over at Ars Technica, as we're continuing to watch the progress here on Starship and Flight 9 getting ready to lift off. Of course, it will be used eventually, the version 3 episode of this rocket and its program, as the human landing system for the Artemis program. But also, it's not the only one that's getting ready to make its debut as part of the Artemis program. Earlier this week, or actually it was just late last week, Dave Limp over at Blue Origin did reveal a couple of interesting images of testing down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, of a mock-up of the Blue Moon Mark II lander and a couple of astronauts that were working to going through the entry of that mock-up there. So, Stephen, just as it's framed in the human landing system program, of course, you've had the opportunity to talk with leadership within HLS office at the Marshall Space Flight Center over several months that the program has been in develop, with the last few missions. Just wanted to get your sense of, now that we're starting to see some mock-up hardware from Blue Origin as SpaceX's, much more public testing campaign continues on, just how you're thinking about HLS and this commercial side of the Artemis venture.
Again, Will, I think there's a lot of question marks over over all of this until we see what happens with NASA's budget. Elon Musk at SpaceX is very pro Mars. He's it seems he has the attitude of, we can go to the moon, that's cool, but the long-term goal is Mars. And without NASA, if the Artemis program is redirected toward focusing on Mars, for example, or the moon is kind of a one-off mission, if there's no plan for a sustained presence or a base on the moon, um, then particularly with Blue Origin, their Blue Moon lander is really designed with the moon in mind. It would require significant modification to go to Mars, even if that was even possible. I'm not sure. Whereas Starship is a Mars-designed vehicle that can also land on the moon. So if there is a pivot toward Mars long term, if there's only going to be a handful of moon missions that NASA's involved in, and then the focus is on Mars, then what's the future of a vehicle like Blue Moon from Blue Origin? Obviously Jeff Bezos has deep pockets. He can fund his own missions to the moon in many respects. However, without NASA, I don't see much of a commercial business case for lunar missions, robotic or crewed, to be honest with you. I know NASA is really hoping that the commercial interest at the moon follows in their footsteps, but if NASA is not leading the way, I don't see that happening. Just like, there are a number of markets that if NASA left the market, I question whether there would ever be a commercial business case that includes lunar landers, that probably includes space stations in low Earth orbit. And, so a lot of this depends on what happens in the next few months with the NASA budget process.
So you think even with companies like, for example, Intuitive Machines, Lunar Outpost, Venturi Astrolab, just to pull the ones that are vying for of course, a NASA contract, to your point, for the lunar terrain vehicle, in talking with them at Space Symposium, they were all very bullish on the idea that, even if their LTV wasn't selected for a mission ahead of as it currently stands, Artemis 5 timeline, that they still want to push forward with their own independent ideas for long-term lunar architecture. Given that fervor, as well as what some of the other nations that are party to the Artemis Accords are saying about their future space ambitions, you think if NASA, pulls the plug on how much they're invested, that's really going to put a damper on the whole thing? That's what I'm hearing you saying. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. I do believe that. I hate to be cynical, but I think that's, NASA is the business case for all these companies. Eventually, 10, 20 years from now, if NASA sticks around for 10 or 20 years with a moon program, then some of these companies may find other business opportunities. But if NASA, lands on the moon on Artemis 3, let's say it's successful, and then that's it. The next step to go to the moon has to be a commercial venture. NASA's going to Mars now. Those companies, I just don't see those companies having much of a future at the moon unless they do some significant pivoting to follow NASA's lead going toward Mars.
Will certainly be interesting to watch. Want to bring in a piece of tape that we were able to capture during our time at last month's Space Symposium. This was part of our conversation with Redwire leader Mike Gold following his talk, where the focus of the discussion was actually on how to use Starship and its future capabilities in order to really expand the possibilities of what can be done not only at the Martian surface but on the way to Mars. And in this part of the clip, we were talking about sort of the duality between the directions for what some people are wanting from America's space program, whether it should be more lunar focused, as some want, or more Mars focused. So just want to play this clip from Mike, and Stephen will get your thoughts on the other side.
Beware of false dichotomies. The choice is not Moon or Mars, it is Moon and Mars. And having been part of the team proudly that architected the Artemis program, that was always the concept. You can't wait to do one or the other. You need to do both at the same time. And perhaps you're not launching people immediately to Mars. Maybe you're doing the moon first, and we will be. But even while doing that, you must take steps to develop the technologies, to have the conversations just like we were today about what does that Mars architecture look like. And then the lessons that we learn from the moon will help inform our designs, our plans for going to Mars. So not only to believe that it's possible to look at the moon and Mars at the same time, I believe it's absolutely necessary to be doing both at the same time if we're going to beat the Chinese, not just to the moon, not just to Mars. It's so important that we launch not just our technology to the moon and Mars, but our values. And that's what this is allowing us to do. That we're blessed with two billionaires, both of whom have different interests. With SpaceX focused on Mars, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin focused on the moon. They're both doing incredible things. Let's stop fighting over the pie and grow the pie together. There's so much synergies, and I've never been more excited about both destinations and NASA's future overall.
Yeah, and just to that point about each of those billionaires really having their own thoughts on this venture. Now, we haven't had the promised company talk from Elon Musk discussing making life multiplanetary and their future Mars ambitions, but Musk did speak with Tim Dodd with Everyday Astronaut for about 10 or so minutes ahead of the preparations for Starship Flight 9. And just to quote one of the comments from Musk, he said, and I quote here, "The goals for Artemis are so small." He goes on to say, quote, "Artemis needs bolder ambitions. I think we should adapt Artemis to say, let's have a base on the moon, not just like go do a remake of this great movie from 1969. The remake is never going to be as good." Goes on to say we should either do a base on the moon or we should send people to Mars, not just try to do the same thing they did 56 years ago, end quote. Stephen, bring you in just to comment on both the Musk comments from Tim Dodd's interview with Elon Musk, as well as what Mike Gold was saying. And just before you pop in, seeing through the vapor, a little bit of a frost ring starting to form on the ship upper stage as liquid oxygen continues to flow there. Currently T-minus 43 minutes, 51 seconds and counting. So liquid methane also now flowing on board the ship, and booster fuel load is about to start in just about 2 minutes. So with those mile markers there, Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts. First on Elon's interview with Tim Dodd from Everyday Astronaut, talking about the small goals, the feeble goals of Artemis. I think he makes a good point that the Artemis architecture, as NASA has been developing it for the last 5 years, by every account probably, whether it's GAO or NASA's Inspector General or independent commissions, is not sustainable. We've heard that a lot in the last some of our listeners who go back 15 years when the Constellation program was canceled, same words were used, not sustainable. And that, I think, was the near unanimous consensus, or is the near unanimous consensus on NASA's Artemis program of record today. NASA's speech and NASA's words, they have been talking much like Elon was talking in his interview with Tim Dodd, Everyday Astronaut, this afternoon, that they want to create, maybe they don't use the word base on the moon, but they want to create a sustained human presence at the moon. Part of that was going to be with the Lunar Gateway, this mini space station in lunar orbit, which doesn't have a wide amount of support, a broad amount of support. That is being proposed for cancellation right now. So it might make sense to instead of having the lunar station in lunar orbit, to put that on the surface of the moon, so you have a permanent or near permanent human presence on the moon. And that seems to me a lot similar to a lot of what Elon is talking about in that interview with Everyday Astronaut. As for the interview with Mike Gold, Mike talks about learning things at the moon or on the way to the moon that are applicable to Mars. The moon is 3 days away, roughly one way. Mars is 6 to 9 months away one way, at least with current propulsion technologies that may be shortened in the coming decades with nuclear propulsion. That also makes a lot of sense to me. However, I think that you have to choose one to do first, and going to the moon, in my view, makes a lot of sense to do first. Artemis 3 under the Trump administration, proposal, Artemis 3 will land on the moon, and then there will be no NASA funding or no NASA supported direct NASA operated or managed lunar landing mission after that. There's really not much clarity on what comes after that. Perhaps something in the model of CLPS, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or COTS, the program that ended up creating the Dragon spacecraft with NASA and SpaceX a decade and a half ago. But there's not a lot of clarity in what that will look like after the termination of the Space Launch System. So, if SpaceX is Elon and SpaceX are all in on Mars, then what does that leave for the moon? Is how much will NASA have to pay SpaceX to maintain a lunar-oriented, a moon-capable Starship versus what may be the baseline going forward for Starship, which is aimed at Mars. So I think there are a lot of question marks. It's in a few months' time, hopefully we know a lot more about where this is heading. But I think that it's good that we have two billionaires, interested in space, putting a lot of money into development. And Mike mentioned what I was talking about earlier. Blue Origin's vehicle is really tailored for the moon, and SpaceX is really tailored for Mars. And where NASA fits into this is still very murky to me.
Also, something that's very murky that, to Tim's credit, he did raise, and then Elon sidestepped with a real answer there was, when Tim brought up the idea of rapid reusability with Starship and if that will factor into the low Earth orbit propellant transfer that would obviously be used for both Moon and Mars missions. Elon didn't really address that point, went on to talk about his thoughts about the Artemis program writ large. I was kind of hoping that we'd get a real answer there as far as how many launches it'll actually take to fill the tanker in low Earth orbit before it's transferred to an HLS version of Starship or a Mars-bound version of Starship. And so hopefully that'll be addressed during the company talk tonight, but I was a little disappointed to not get a real answer to what is a genuine question of what does rapid reusability really mean in a mission sense, and what does that mean for the Artemis program, since it's a taxpayer venture, and it'd be nice for us, the taxpayers, to get a little more clarity on that.
I agree, Will, and yeah, I think there's still some error bars on the number of tanking flights it will take to fill up the propellant depot and facilitate an HLS mission, a lunar landing mission with Starship. I don't think SpaceX or NASA can say this is exactly how many flights it will take at this point, because I think a lot of the data they gather in the demonstration of in-space propellant transfer, once they get to version 3 of Starship, the propellant transfer will require version 3 of Starship, so that's still some time away. That will inform engineers, SpaceX and NASA, exactly how many flights they need to budget for. And then you can back out from that how rapidly you need to be able to reuse boosters and ships for those tanking flights, because they need data on how long the cryogenics remain at the right temperature. How long can these propellants remain conditioned at super cold temperatures in orbit? So that gives them an idea of how long of a window they have to do all these tanking flights, whether it's 5, 10, or 15. Do they have 2 weeks to do it? Do they have 2 months to do it? Can they do it over 6 months? That is all unclear to me, and it's not. In my discussions with NASA officials at the HLS program office, those numbers are also, they have a range of numbers, but they don't have a specific number until they get some hard data from flight testing.
Yeah, like you said, version 3 of the ship upper stage still an unknown amount of time off, and hopefully we'll get through a full flight profile with this Block 2 upgraded version today, coming up here, ready to lift off in about 36.5 minutes. Taking a look at the next milestone that's just around the corner. We're about 30 seconds away from booster LOX load beginning, and that will be the last big piece of tanking that has yet to begin getting underway, but seeing some nice frost rings forming on the ship upper stage there. Booster fuel load also in work. Shortly, we should also be getting some views from SpaceX as their feed is about to start, and actually looks like it's just now getting going. Fingers crossed that they've resolved some of their streaming issues on X and that we don't get the loading circle of doom that we encountered during the Starlink 17-1 mission earlier today, but fingers crossed on that. Before we go ahead and get those views from SpaceX worked in, do want to thank all of you who are watching with us live, whether on the LabPadre stream or Spaceflight now. You could do us all a big favor just by clicking the like button, share the stream, allows more folks to find your way into this live launch coverage. And also, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to both YouTube channels as well as to CSI Starbase, and be sure to follow Ars Technica and Stephen Clark in particular everywhere he is bopping around the internet, like on X. Also, one last little nifty thing before we get some views from SpaceX. Find folks at the LabPadre shop have some new minted coins, including Flight 2-8 that are in the shop, so you can check that out over at the LabPadre shop at your convenience. Update from SpaceX's Dan Hewitt that they are working no issues at this point in the countdown. They are continuing to target the opening of the window, so things are progressing towards an on-time liftoff at this point at T-minus 33 minutes and 21 seconds. As we've learned from previous Starship flights, if SpaceX does need a little bit more time, they do have the ability to hold the count, which would come in at about T-minus 40 seconds. For those of you who may just be joining the broadcast, just want to make a quick reminder here as we're getting these views that SpaceX is not going to be attempting to catch the Super Heavy booster. So if you recall during the past few launch attempts that once they got to the point of stage separation, they were tracking parameters throughout the course of the flight and making a call in real time on whether they would make the catch or not. But today that is off the table, as they're going to be, as Zach was saying earlier in the broadcast, targeting some other goals with the Super Heavy booster. That includes closing off part of the vent there in the hot staging ring to allow for a more controlled separation and angle of direction for the Super Heavy booster, and bringing it down for a hard splashdown over the Gulf with a higher angle of attack. as we're coming into the last 31 and a half minutes, Zach, want to bring you back into the conversation as we were talking about some of the long-term impacts that these launches have had on Pad A. Obviously, over here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, they've been working to develop another Starship tower there. The folks at Geosat actually have been doing some really nice satellite work and doing some month-to-month comparisons as they do passovers of Launch Complex 39A. So, Zach, as they continue to develop this pad and get ready to start launching Starship rockets eventually from Florida, what are some of the improvements and refinements that you're expecting to see here in Florida that they've been learning from, first with developing Pad A and currently with Pad B?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting situation going on there. Luckily, they figured out that they were going to need to completely rework the launch mount before they got too deep into construction. So they did have the underground water manifold for the deluge system installed prior to this, and then they also had the legs of the launch mount installed. And luckily, they did not install the actual launch mount itself. So that reduced the amount of work that they had to do because they ended up ripping all of that out. So I think that was, I want to say, the end of last year when they dismantled the legs, and we never really got to see them dig out that deluge manifold, but assuming it's also gone because they have now started to lay down the sheet pilings, which are basically the temporary walls of the trench. So that is necessary as they're also starting to do the additional groundwork for the continuous flight auger pilings, which go, I think, about 200 feet underground, something like that. So those basically support the actual bathtub of the trench. So they're in that process of basically doing the exact same thing they did on Pad B right now. So I would say they're probably about 5 months behind where Pad B is at currently. The nice thing is that they do have, I think, the QD arm installed down there. I'd have to go. I missed that in that when we just had that up on the screen there. But I do believe they have that QD arm installed already down there. They also need to basically completely redo the tank farm. So a lot of the major components that were forming that tank farm, basically all of the horizontal storage tanks, I believe most of the pre-chill system, as far as the kettle boilers, the super cooling components for that LOX load system, all got moved down to Starbase. So like literally they gutted the entire system. They have to redo all of it. And that makes sense actually, because the system that they had in place is very, very different than what they're building for Pad B right now. Pad B's tank farm is an order of magnitude more advanced, in my opinion, than what they had initially for Pad A. And even since they retrofitted Pad A's propellant supply system, this is even more advanced than that. So in the foreground on Rover 2, they actually have all of the liquid oxygen and methane pumps there. So there's 8 methane pumps, 9 liquid oxygen pumps, which are just barely in view through the vapors right there. That should allow them, assuming they were loading it into the basically same size vehicles that we're seeing currently, that would allow them to cut the propellant loading time nearly in half, I believe. So it's like should bring it down to about 30 minutes, if not faster. So it's going to be a completely different look once those get going. And I imagine that they probably want to basically duplicate this system for Pad 39A. And so, like I said, luckily they didn't get too deep into it, into construction out there, because they ended up having to rip all of that out and redo it. But yeah, quite a massive process going on down there. And what we're seeing at Pad B here will basically also have to be done on Pad A. So they will essentially have to demolish the launch mount, you just simply can't install a flame trench with that launch mount in place. Beyond that, Pad A's launch mount is not compatible with the version 3 boosters in any way, shape, or form. It is completely different. So they'll have to completely strip all of that stuff out, and then start over as far as the launch mount goes. So that will be, creating another flame trench, building a second, I guess I'm going to call it a V3 launch mount at this point. It's more like version 3 is probably safe to call it. So they need to build another one. The question remains what they're going to do with the tower. So we can pretty much guarantee that they'll have to pull the chopsticks off and either retrofit these ones. So they could just cut these down to the same size as the ones on Pad B, or they could just remake them. So we'll have to wait to see how they end up doing that. The big question is what they're going to do with the tower. So this tower is a lot different than Pad B's tower. It is nowhere near as well reinforced. It doesn't have anywhere near the level of ground support as far as the foundation goes. And the actual base of the tower is, it is shielded with steel, but it's just not the same. So Pad B's tower base is basically a two-sided steel sandwich, which has concrete in the middle of it. Pad A's, is basically a concrete base with steel shielding on the perimeter of it. So not quite the same, not as strong as the Pad B tower. I believe the steel they used is different as well, because with Pad B having sat there for quite a while at this point, I think longer than 6 months, approaching 8 months, I want to say. We haven't seen any rusting on the outside of it yet, and overall it just looks to be a lot better condition than Pad A, even considering the difference of how long Pad A has been sitting there. So yeah, a big question on whether or not they'll have to completely demolish the tower. That detail will dramatically change how long it takes for them to retrofit Pad A. Luckily, they don't necessarily need to make the tower taller. That is something that Elon had said during his last tour during the Everyday Astronaut's last tour with Elon. He did mention that the tower was going to be taller, which is true in a way, but not really at the same time. So they didn't make the tower taller. They brought the launch mount closer to the ground, which basically enables them to not have to make the tower taller, because there's just more room in between the launch deck and the top of the tower. So yeah, in a way it is taller, but I think that is one thing that will save them from not having to completely redo this tower. The big question I also have, I'm pretty confident that the Pad A launch mount was sinking at some point. There are some indications of that, which I'm probably saving for another episode in the future. The question is whether or not the tower was sinking. So if the tower was also sinking, they may just want to completely reform the base of that. But I guess for the sake of speed, hopefully they don't have to do that. They will completely redo the deluge farm and probably remove a lot of the components that are in the tank farm directly in front of the launch mount. So a lot of that stuff will be coming out in order to make room for the flame trench. You don't want the flame trench basically shooting straight into the tank farm. So yeah, lots of excitement coming up after they get Pad B online. Lots of questions will be answered, and that will feed into what happens at KSC as well too. And I think we'll probably see them form another launch mount down there as well too, a second launch pad. I think we've started to see components for an additional tower show up, or indications that another tower will soon be assembled down there. So the question is, where will that go? I do wonder if they may put another one on 39A. So there was some signs, I think in some documentation, that they may end up having a catch-only tower at Pad 39A, which I personally would not like to see. But yeah, that is the question on where that next tower will go. They do have other launch complexes that they are in the process of gaining access to. So yeah, that's some big questions will be answered hopefully soon at Pad 39A. I think Stephen, you may have more information on that than I do. Actually, I haven't paid much attention to the actions going on at KSC, honestly.
Yeah, as Stephen comes back to the mic here in just a minute. Space Launch Complex 37, the now former home of the United Launch Alliance Delta IV rockets, which had its last Delta IV heavy flight with NROL 70. That is now being looked at by SpaceX for future Starship operations, and I believe as of right now it's still with the Department of the Air Force going through environmental assessment and reviews, and a final determination on that has not yet been made, but that has been going through its necessary processes. I know they've done public scoping on that here along the Space Coast. There were a couple of in-person meetings in Titusville, as well as in Cape Canaveral, as well as at least one virtual meeting, to my recollection. So things are progressing with that pad, as are things as well over at Pad 39A with its environmental checkouts, which also has NASA in the loop as well. Stephen, if you wanted to add anything else to that, if I might have missed something.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit all the pertinent points there. I will say that, as those who have followed developments at Starbase know, these environmental reviews take a lot of time, and I'm not anticipating the Space Force is not anticipating any finding from the environmental review and authorization to begin construction at Slick 37 or the Slick 50 new pad alternative for this would be the second Starship launch site at Cape Canaveral. Not expecting any approval for that until sometime next year. So I would say probably at least 2 years away, probably more, at least 2 years away from seeing a Starship fly from Pad 37 or the theoretical Pad 50.
Yeah, probably still a good ways off from that. Just for a quick point in time, we're T-minus 18 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. At this point, the Raptor engine chill process is getting underway. So far, everything seems to be remaining on track with the planned flight of Starship Flight 9, looking for an on-time liftoff at the beginning of the window, so coming up just in about 18 minutes and 15 seconds from now. The next big fueling milestone coming up is going to be the conclusion of ship prop load at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff. And then booster prop load wraps up about 30 seconds afterwards. That'll be followed by the SpaceX flight director giving their go for launch at the 30-second mark. So things continue to progress well from a tanking point of view. Taking a quick look at our respective live chats here, I want to thank Nobody for a $1 super chat. I want to thank Carrie W for a $4 super chat as well. Thank you, Carrie. Pesky Girl with a $10 super chat saying thanks for the entertaining and informational coverage. Thank you so much for the super chat and for the kind words there. And also want to thank channel member Jeff Hansen for a $10 super chat, who says, go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship, Godspeed, S-35, and B-14. SpaceX's Dan Hout notes that we are Not tracking any issues. SpaceX is not. You can see the prop load percentages there on the left-hand side of your screen, thanks to this good graphic from SpaceX. No weather concerns, according to Dan, so that is also a good sign.
Surprised they still haven't updated the graphic to the V2 ship. Still using V1 graphics there.
Probably on the lower side of the priority list for SpaceX. Let's just have a good flight of the Block 2 first, and then we can worry about the graphics. There's also a nice view of the hot stage ring, though I'm not sure if we're quite seeing, Zach, what you were talking about earlier with the block vents that'll be on display during staging this go around, right?
Yeah, they did show a view of it in the factory a little bit ago. Hopefully we'll get a view of the front here shortly, and we'll be able to see it a little bit better.
And actually, SpaceX commentators just talking about the changes for creating a directional flip of the booster, so perhaps they will hone in a little more directly on that in just a second here. Actually, here we go. This is a comparison of the various staging events that have happened from previous flights. And essentially, as they're talking about, they had this randomization of the booster flip that they're now trying to control for today by closing off part of those vents. So that'll be a key feature that they're trying to demonstrate. And Zach, I know you've mentioned in some of your videos that the booster development is really something you're keenly interested in. So how crucial in your mind is being able to control the directional shift hot staging event in a flight like this?
Yeah, definitely as far as propellant usage efficiency, I would say it's super important. Again, I'm very surprised that they weren't able to do that already just off of controlling the ignition sequence on the ship. A bit confused on that because the ignition sequence for the booster seems to be extremely precise. Like it lifts off basically in the same orientation all the time as far as the little lean away from the tower that it does. And in general, in order to prevent it from like actually colliding with the launch mount, you need to have fairly equal thrust coming out of all those engines. So I'm surprised that they don't have the ability to do the same thing on the ship. And, you know, one thing I explained in that episode was that like simply by igniting the ones on the front of the ship first, the two RVACs, followed by the one in the back side of the ship, you could easily control that. So I'm a bit baffled about that it wasn't easier for them to actually control that. And same thing with the grid fins. You know, using the grid fins to actually help guide it in a certain direction. I guess it's pretty clear that the differential thrust from the engines has more of an effect than what the grid fins are doing. So that does actually make sense though to some degree, because I was a bit confused on a few of the flights that the directions that the grid fins turned didn't match the direction that the booster actually moved during the flip. So I was beginning to think there was something weird going on there, and now we at least have some answers on in that area. So yeah, this will be interesting to see. Not only well, we basically know which direction it'll move now. It'll move towards the front, basically the front of the ship, and the question, in my opinion, now is going to be how fast that flip happens. So now that you're basically guaranteeing that it turns in a certain direction, you also have to kind of worry about how fast it moves in that direction, because you don't want to turn so quickly that you cause a lot of fuel sloshing. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in general how the booster performs during that maneuver.
Yeah, interesting to see that, as well as during the landing sequence having one of those 3 center engines out and bringing in one of the middle ring engines to compensate for that. Obviously, testing a bad day case scenario will be an important
one thing to
for
add
SpaceX
onto
to
that,
work through and make sure that they can address that should it happen unintentionally in a future flight, right?
Yeah, one thing to add about that, I've always been under the assumption that they needed as much vent capability as they can get in order to reduce the damage to the top of the booster. Like, you just want as much of the volume of gas that you're putting out to be able to escape. So by blocking a little bit of it, you're actually increasing the amount of pressure in the interstage. On other vehicles that do hot staging, that typically results in the actual destruction of the hot stage interface. So it will be interesting to I imagine that's part of the test here as well, is to figure out if the actual hot stage ring can handle it, because there is a possibility, a non-zero possibility, that it could actually destroy the hot stage ring, at least the front side of it, as the ship is firing those engines. Not gonna lie, I kind of want to see that, as long as it doesn't affect what the booster has to do after, because I'm pretty sure it could probably, since it's gonna, jettison the hot stage ring anyways, as long as it doesn't damage the booster, I think it would actually be kind of cool to see, a failed hot stage ring.
Yeah, all these developments are really interesting to watch. I mean, it's quite a program to have on display, being that it is so iterative in nature. The choices that SpaceX is and is not making, really says a lot about their thought process throughout this whole thing. And speaking of going into the thought process, actually within just the last couple of minutes, we saw a new piece by Stephen Clark's colleague Eric Berger over at Ars Technica, who had the opportunity to speak with Elon Musk ahead of today's planned launch attempt coming up in just about 8.5 minutes. So, Stephen, I don't know if you've had a chance to read through your colleague's work. Obviously, you've been on the line with us for our broadcasts, but if you've had a chance to peruse some of Musk's answers from that, I wonder what kind of jumped out at you from that back and forth.
We'll wait.
Steven, just checking to see that we got you still here with us. And we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Stephen Clark's mic, so we're going to go ahead and bring him back in just a little bit. Just one thing, maybe Zach, if you want to hop on this one, just looking. Oh, okay. I hear we have Stephen Clark back on the horn. Stephen, can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear, Will. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Got you back. All right. So, just wondering if you had a chance to peruse your colleague Eric Berger's latest write-up with his conversation with Elon Musk in the run-up to this launch. Just what were some of your top-line thoughts coming out of that?
Yeah, just reading through it now, as a matter of fact, and I think it just reiterates the fact that this is still an experimental program, still a test flight, and they've learned some things about the engine bay on the Starship in these last 2 flights that have been ended prematurely, and obviously there was the resonance, the vibration issue on Flight 7, and then something literally, I guess, broke in one of the Raptor engines on Flight 8 that led to its demise. And Elon Musk tells my colleague Eric Berger that he feels like there's about an 80% chance that they've got those issues resolved. And just reading through his comments, he said they had to tighten bolts that attach the thrust chamber to the injector head on the engine, and they had to work on some of the seals and get some of those technical issues resolved. I'm still reading through the story, so bear with me. I'm going along as I'm talking, because this just went public just a few minutes ago. So and it's in a Q&A format, so I'm just reading through it as many of our listeners probably are.
Yeah, so as you peruse that, Zach, just to bring you in on one of the things that was just mentioned as we're hearing that the range is still green, still looking good. In one of his comments, Musk told Eric Berger with Ars Technica that the timeline for flying the Raptor 3 engines is, according to Musk, at the end of this year. Does that kind of jive with what you were thinking, Zach, based off of what we're able to publicly see on the development of the Super Heavy booster, and where the ship upper stage is this time, that the end of the year is realistic for Raptor 3?
Yeah, that was one thing I kind of predicted in my latest episode, that they're probably at least 6 months out from that. It's a bit difficult to, I'm glad we have confirmation on that. It was difficult to actually speculate on that specific topic because of just the things that we've seen. So NASA Spaceflight does have their McGregor testing facility cameras, and through those cameras over the last few months, we've seen several failed Raptor 3 tests where it actually results in, an engine rud. So it does seem like they've been encountering issues with Raptor 3 development. I think that another part of this potentially is related to the issues that they've seen on the latest V2 ships, having to potentially go back and make modifications to those engines to make sure that they don't have that same issue, whatever that issue actually is. So yeah, this also, by saying that Raptor 3 will be available by the end of the year, that also kind of fits with what we're seeing with the first version 3 booster. So right now they're still performing they're preparing to perform the first structural verification tests on the booster, the booster test tank 17, which is currently at Massey's. So they have an upgraded landing tank inside of there. Also, there's a completely new thrust puck and engine mount design on that. So they're in the process of testing that, and also simultaneously stacking the first version 3 booster right now. So based on the timelines that we've seen between initial stacking, cryo testing, static fire testing, and actually launching, it does make sense that that first launch on Pad B and with the version 3 booster and with Raptor 3 will all happen near the end of this year.
Well, we are now just less than 3 minutes away from the planned launch of Starship Flight 9, the next big milestone towards getting to those Raptor 3s at the end of the year, if all holds true. At this point, the ship prop load will have wrapped up. We're looking... Actually, with T-minus 2 minutes and 20 seconds now, the ship should be fully loaded with its propellant for today's flight, both on the ship and the upper stage. Again, the SpaceX launch director will make their call on the go for launch coming up here at about T-minus 30 seconds. Although we are hearing from SpaceX commentators that they are going to hold at T-minus 40 seconds, so a hold will come into play once you see the SpaceX clock hit the T-minus 40 second mark. Our clock will also freeze as well. Standing by for some information here. let's go ahead and listen into SpaceX commentary.
We will expect to see the clock pause at T-minus 40. And then again, we've got a couple of minutes. They can work through the issues. If we're able to clear them, we can still launch today. If it's something that we can't, we can always stand down, turn around, recycle, fly again tomorrow.
Again, that's really important. This is what terminal count is exactly for, is to be checking the vehicle, monitoring the vehicle systems as it makes its way down to T0. And again, this gives us the ability to catch anything and be able to hold, as Dan has been saying, and recycle if we need to, or pause so that we can work through those issues and see if it's something that we need to stand down for. And as Dan mentioned, we will be holding at T-minus 40 seconds, so in about 20 seconds from now.
Yeah, so we'll hold there, and they'll work through these final checkouts on, sounds like just one of those Raptors on the first stage on Super Heavy, which, as you said, we're reflying it for the first time. 29 of those 33 engines have already been used in a launch, one of which has already launched
Twice, and we'll go for
and
its
is getting ready for its third
time.
Right. And you just heard our flight director for the day, Joe Sliker. He just shared that we are going to hold at this T-minus 40 second mark. Keep an eye on one of those Raptor engines on booster.
Yeah, it looks like they're holding for just one of those engines. That's interesting. It must be one of the ones that's involved in their planned experiment during the landing maneuver, because I would imagine having one engine unavailable is not enough to normally stop them from initiating the final.
And if you're just now jumping in, we are holding still at T-minus 40 seconds. Watching one engine, waiting for temperatures to kind of get to a zone that we want them to on one of the engines on the booster, on the Super Heavy booster, getting ready for its second ever flight. So we'll just continue to hold. Again, we can hang out here for several minutes. We held for a while on the first attempt last time, and then cleared it, and then we triggered a different issue on the ground side.
But again, this is exactly what it's for. This gives us the best chances at success.
And the clock is rolling.
There we go.
All right.
And we do have a resumption of the clock. Now we're less than 30 seconds in real time. To hear the call of the flight director is go for launch. Standing by. We're at hold again. Following the go-ahead for a go for launch, a hold was called once again. You see the clock has pushed back to T-minus 41 seconds.
Yeah, luckily for us, they did not trigger the deluge system during that countdown, or else we would be looking at an abort.
Yeah, that's a really important point there, Zach, since, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it takes at least a day, if not potentially up to 48 hours to make sure that the deluge system is back up to its full levels, right, before it can make another launch attempt if it's triggered.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's a bit of a question whether or not part of the abort sequence also aborts the deluge system. So it may potentially be pre-programmed to just do the full thing that it's expected to do instead of stopping as soon as the abort is triggered. So that would be the big question on, how much water is actually pushed through that system, how long it takes to recycle. So a lot of questions there, as far as the booster or the actual vehicle goes. I don't know if they've specifically said their capability for holding, but given that the prop load time has basically been cut in half from 90 minutes down to 45, I would imagine that they at least have 45 minutes of hold time available.
Well, they did mention they have several minutes, which didn't sound quite as optimistic as 40, though that would be nice for them to have that much margin. We are hearing that there is a tower-related ground side issue that they are currently looking into and figuring out if this is something that can be worked through now or if they're going to have to stand down for today's launch opportunity. The very latest from SpaceX as they continue to hold at the T-minus 40-second mark.
Yeah, that's interesting. It must be the QD arm, if I had to guess, because I would imagine that would be one of the only things that would stop them, considering they're not planning to catch the booster. So, interesting call out there.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds very reasonable, just like I said, given... Although, even if the tower is not going to be used for a catch, are there still receivers on the tower that they would still have in the loop to monitor the booster, sort of like what they did for some of the earlier flights where they weren't intending to catch it, but, we're going through some of the, internal and external motions? Or do you think that that's
if they
not in the loop for something like this?
If they, for some reason, still plan to simulate a booster catch, yeah, I could see that being a thing. I'm not sure how critical the rest of the tower is for actually, capturing telemetry or anything like that during flight. So, or actually communicating with the vehicle. That's a question we no longer know the answer to. They have.
And Zach, I'm gonna. Sorry to cut you off. It sounds like they're potentially coming up to a decision point here. So let's go ahead and listen into SpaceX commentary, and we'll hop back in just a moment.
All right, so we are getting to a resolution. We're going to reset everything.
Not entirely clear what reset everything means in this case. They're currently still holding.
I think it means
T-minus
Control
40.
Alt Delete and then reboot.
All right, so we're going to see the clock. It is now rolling.
Here we go.
We ascend.
And Zach, to your point, they noted there was an issue with the quick disconnect, and note that there may be another issue. Looks like they're going. The water deluge system is activated. Less than 10 seconds. Engine ignition. And we have movement. Liftoff of Starship on Flight 9. And for just the 9th time, the full Starship integrated stack has cleared the tower. About 40 seconds into flight. All 333 Raptor engines have ignited at this point. Vehicle's about to pass through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure. Confirmation of max Q. About a minute and a half to hot state or super heavy MECO, most engines cut off, and then a hot staging seconds afterwards. Looks like good on camera or onboard views. Clear picture, nice view of the Texas coastline. Mexico as well. This is the first flight of a reused super heavy booster with 29 of those 33 Raptor engines flying once again. Still appears to be a good initial burn. Coming up on about 30 seconds before Super Heavy MECO. Most engines cut off. And we've got staging in real time. Separation. SpaceX feed coming in on a slight delay, so we'll see these events replicated beyond our tracking cameras here in Starbase, thanks to LabPadre. Coming up on 3 minutes in flight. And you can see the ship upper stage just off the edge of the Super Heavy. Boost back burn still in play. Just about 15 seconds away from the end of the boost back burn in real time. Again, for those who may just be joining in for the first time in this broadcast, the Super Heavy booster will not be attempted to be caught by the tower. Coming up at about T plus 6 minutes and 19 seconds will be the Super Heavy landing burn start. Seeing some good views from the ship upper stage S-35. Continuing to climb at about 111 kilometers in altitude. We're a little less than 2 minutes to the start of the Super Heavy landing burn here. Seeing some of the excess liquid oxygen being dumped. This is intentional on the booster stage. You can still see the hot staging ring. Actually, that's that little dot just beneath the booster in this tracking cam view.
Uh-oh. Bit of a fire in the aft section. That is no bueno.
Yeah, you can see a little bit of irregularity.
That could be the nitrogen purge system, though.
Yeah, they haven't mentioned anything about that, so hopefully that's intentional. Coming up on 5.5 minutes into flight.
It is burning blue, I'll note.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, the sun angle isn't helping with getting good visibility on that. The glow that you're seeing in the aft section of the Super Heavy booster, that is not the burn starting just yet. That is just the glow of the heat off of the shielding there. Coming up on the start of the landing burn in real time. There you can see it looked like the start of the, yep, there's the, it looks like they lost the booster during the start of the landing burn, which was not intention. That was not the intention. Unclear if that was actually the landing burn itself. So while they were not intending to recover the booster, they also were not intending to lose it during the landing burn. So that'll be something that SpaceX will be looking at. Coming up now on about 7 minutes, 15 seconds into the flight of the ship upper stage. We'll see if they get through this point. The last two flights, they were unable to get through the conclusion, the intended conclusion of the upper stage engine burn. Now, a nominal ship engine cutoff is expected at about T plus 8 minutes and 56 seconds. So just a little more than a minute from now. Less than a minute remaining in this burn.
More fire appearing on the right side. And the RVAC nozzle is getting pretty hot.
I did just see some lateral motion, it looked like, in the ship. Like it was yawing a bit. It's hard to tell for sure.
Yeah, interesting that they don't have the previously used ship orientation. Oh, there it goes. All right, there.
Yeah, look at that glow.
The Raptors, or the Raptor vacuum engines have shut down. Sea level should be shutting down right about now. Confirmation of ship engine cutoff by SpaceX. And this is already farther than they were able to get with flights 7 and 8, so really important milestone for the Starship program to get to this point now.
Is that motion normal?
A bit difficult to tell.
It did seem a little bit more than I would have expected. Kind of hard to gauge the orientation here without the Earth view. Now about 10 and a half minutes into the flight, assuming all continues to go as SpaceX intends, we're coming up on the payload deployment demonstration, which would be the first time that Starship would deploy any kind of payload. It's got 8 dummy Starlinks on board. You can see actually the door that is right there in the middle of the ship that is being reflected on by the sun from this angle. So as we continue to watch these upper stage views, Stephen, I'll bring you back in first. Just your initial thoughts on the first time a Block 2 version of the ship upper stage has made it to this point in the flight, and you know what you're expecting with the next couple milestones here with the payload deployment and the in-space relight demonstration.
Well, certainly they got farther than they did on flight 7 or 8, so we're not going to be worried about any debris falling over Turks and Caicos this time, which is always a good thing. all the discussion about the air traffic disruptions, not an issue with this flight. We'll see what happens next. I'm a little concerned about the motion we're seeing on the ship. Seems to be moving around a lot more than I recall on the previous flights. Looks like that's a beautiful shot there over the Bahamas now, out over the Atlantic Ocean, but not sure what to make of this motion, if it's part of a normal process to maybe, thermally stabilize the vehicle, like a barbecue roll, like we see a lot of rockets do to make sure all sides of the vehicle are roughly at equal temperatures. That may be what we're seeing here, but we'll see in the next few minutes if SpaceX moves forward with their next test, which is the Starlink replica or Starlink mock-up deploy test.
Zach, I'll go to you next. Your thoughts on where we are in the mission, and Stephen's thoughts about the orientation of the vehicle that we've seen so far.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm kind of going back and looking at footage again. I was just looking at re-looking at the shutdown there. Very, very interesting differences from past flights. I mean, overall, it seems like everything is fine. I mean, they do have RCS thrusters, so they theoretically should be able to reorient the ship if there is any like odd things going on with that. I guess if they make it to payload deployment, that will be a big sign that everything is going as expected. But I mean, so far everything obviously looks much better than the last two flights, so that is fantastic news. I'm sure they're really happy that they made it past there. I do think that there were still some issues going on there leading up to SECO, and it honestly seemed like it held on by a thread there. So yeah, very interesting. I'm hoping they give more details about that later.
Yeah, certainly hoping they flesh out some of those details, as we're now just about 4 minutes away from the payload deployment demonstration. So we'll be watching for the opening of the door as they get ready for that milestone. And as they commentators are just noting, they've only opened the payload bay door once during Starship flight while it was in space along a suborbital trajectory. So that in of itself will be a notable milestone. And then, of course, the actual deployment. Actually, you can see those simulator Starlinks right there. Now, a look live inside the payload bay of Starship. A rare glimpse inside the interior of this upper stage while it's in flight. Zach, I know obviously you take a very close look at all the opportunities we get for details like that. Brief though it was, did anything jump out at you just there?
Not quite. I do need to go back and review a few things. I'm like, mine's all over the place at the moment. And then I get distracted by these views of the payload bay, which are pretty awesome right here. Nice up close. And I wonder if this is a camera on one of the actual Starlink simulators, because if so, that is going to be pretty amazing if we actually get to see that from the view of the Starlink when it deploys. This may actually be the first one, the lowest one on the rack, which means it'll be looking back at the others.
Well, SpaceX certainly loves to make its renders a reality. So, we've seen the animation of a deployment of Starlink satellites, the actual version 3s. So that'd be pretty nifty if that actually were to come to pass with one of these simulator Starlink satellites. Coming up on just a couple minutes before that milestone comes up, said to happen about T plus 18 minutes and 26 seconds. So we should see the payload bay door opening here in the next probably about a minute or so in preparation for that.
Yeah, and just looking back again, I think that camera was actually on the wall of the payload section, even though it looked like it was on the one of the Starlinks. I don't think it is. So that would be quite the feat, honestly, to pull that off, because you would need some sort of system communication from the dummy Starlinks back to the ship. So I'm not necessarily expecting to see that, although it would be cool.
Yeah, and as captured by LabPadre through its great 24/7 live cameras on YouTube, we did get to see views of these simulator Starlinks being loaded on, and they seem pretty basic. So while it would be nice to see them have some kind of camera capability to capture it floating in real time, I would also be shocked to see that happen. Did hear comments that they were unable to open the door all the way. They started the opening sequence, but it wasn't able to open all the way, so they're going to close it, and it sounds like try again. Now, the next milestone in this mission is the in-space relight demo of one of the Raptors on the ship upper stage, so unclear exactly how long they have to fiddle with this, how much margin they have with this part of the mission before they move on ahead. And actually, we just heard the call that they are unable to deploy those Starlink simulators. They have made the call that they are going to be moving on. Taking a live look right now at mission control, not in Starbase, Texas. This is Hawthorne, California. Looking back inside the payload bay here, as again, for those who may just be joining us now with the joint live coverage between LabPadre and Spaceflight now, Starship was able to successfully launch from Pad A down at Starbase, Texas. The mission got through successful hot staging, and the booster, as it began to orient itself ahead of the start of the landing burn, did have what appeared to be an earlier issue. Unclear exactly if that was as the landing burn was starting or if it was just shortly before the landing burn, but right around that point in the timeline. And so initially the goal was to have the landing burn take place, to shut down those engines, do sort of a staggered experiment where they would have 2 of the 3 center engines lit with 1 out, and then they would use one of the middle ring engines to demonstrate what would happen if one of the center 3 engines were to have an issue unintentionally. But as the case turned out, they were unable to completely go through that experiment. And then moving on, we did see a good shutdown of the ship's engines, both the sea level and vacuum Raptors. Those had a successful staggered shutdown. Did appear that there was a bit more movement than may have been initially anticipated, but it looks like things got sorted out, and so they entered into a good coast phase with Ship 35 at this point in time. And most recently, as we just saw them attempt, was trying to get the door open in order to deploy the simulator Starlink satellites, which were going to be following the same suborbital trajectory as the ship upper stage, and therefore we're not going to enter into an orbital plane of existence, but rather would be falling into the Indian Ocean, same as the ship upper stage as well. So coming up next, as we're just about 21 and a half minutes into Starship Flight 9, we're looking forward to the Raptor in-space relight demo, which will be an important continuing demonstration of the Block 2 of the ship upper stage. That'll be important for future missions when SpaceX will need to perform additional burns in space, as well as performing a deorbit burn eventually, will be greatly key. Following the in-space relight demo, about 10 minutes after that, the ship upper stage will begin its re-entry sequence at about T plus 47 minutes and 50 seconds. And then the ship will target a splashdown in the Indian Ocean about 1 hour and 6.5 minutes, I should say, post liftoff. So a number of important successes so far on this mission, a couple of hiccups along the way. Not entirely unexpected, as this is an iterative program, and as SpaceX, likes to lean upon the fact that they don't need everything to go right in any given mission. They just need to continue making progress as they roll out future versions, both on paper and in hardware, for the Starship program. Before we bring our guests back in, do want to thank a few folks for your support of our live coverage here. Really appreciate you being with us for Starship Flight 9. Let's see, I want to thank Bill Anderson with a $20 super chat who says, best technical SpaceX coverage on YouTube. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate the kind words. Jim Spiller with a $10 super chat. Proud member of the U.S. Navy, retired. Martha Johnson with a $10 super chat who says, Spaceflight Now has great hosts, interesting guests, and excellent coverage. Go Spaceflight Now. Thank you, Martha, for the kind words. I'll extend that as well to LabPadre for their great efforts as well. This is very much a team sport here with these launches. Ken Melvin, who says, thanks for the greatest coverage with a $5 super chat. Thank you, Ken. Hope you're doing well. Rich Cronenbush with a $10 super chat as well. Thank you, Rick. Jim Ebo with a $10 super chat as well, saying let's go, probably as the launch was just getting underway. Pesky Girl, certainly not pesky to us, with a $10 super chat, who says, thanks for the entertaining and informational coverage. And Beverly Knuckles with a very generous $20 super chat, who says, I saw it fly over the British Virgin Islands, shut down directly over Virgin Gorda, which is very cool. If you happen to catch the flight of Starship Flight 9 as it made its ascent over the Gulf and began its journey, we would love to see what you capture. Go ahead and tag us either at Spaceflight Now or at LabPadre on X. We'd love to see what you were able to capture as we continue to track the mission, and thankfully not going to get views of the ship upper stage breaking up over the Turks and Caicos. I'm sure that government is quite happy to not see those sights once again. Time now T plus 27 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. At this point, we're just about 10 minutes away from that in-space relight demonstration mission. Stephen, bringing you back into the conversation here as we're awaiting that next milestone. You know, perhaps this is because Elon Musk will be giving a talk coming up in presumably the next hour or so. But just your thoughts, just looking back on the SpaceX broadcast, thought it notable that basically during the other previous 8 missions, there were some notable either announcements or you know, sort of key discussions about some of the milestones that have been made with the Starship program and some of the other things surrounding that, which seem to be quite notably absent from this broadcast. Do you think they're intentionally holding back right now because Musk is going to be making some announcements later on, or is that something we just shouldn't read too much into at this point?
Yeah, I don't know, Will. I wouldn't read a lot into it. You know, if Elon in his talk this evening doesn't go into any of that, then maybe that'll be the time to try to take a lesson from, you know, what SpaceX is not saying.
Well,
as I recall, on previous broadcasts, they shared milestones like some of the training or some of the reviews they've done for HLS, Human Landing System for Artemis, right?
Sorry to cut you off, Stephen. I know I asked the question and then I'm pivoting right now. But speaking of what they're not saying, just noticing the telemetry icon of the ship upper stage in the lower right-hand corner of the screen here, doing quite a bit more oscillating than I would have expected at this stage in flight, tilting very dramatically in a downward fashion and then back up again. I don't believe we saw that in the previous flights where all was going swimmingly with ship upper stage, right? This seems odd to me.
No, that's a good point, Will. And now we're seeing a live view from the vehicle. Over, it's in a night pass now, so we're not seeing a lot of detail.
No, not a lot of detail, but perhaps quite a bit more movement than we should be seeing.
I tend to agree from what we've seen in the video earlier, when it was still daylight, when it was still in sunlight, and also what we're seeing on the icon now on the display. If that is accurate, I don't think that is normal.
Yeah, definitely appears to be tumbling just with the lighting in the background. Yeah, that's a suboptimal.
So, according to the timeline, we should be about less than 7 minutes away from the relight demonstration. I can't imagine, if it's tumbling as it appears to be, that they would be able to do that. Let's listen in.
We're about 30 minutes into today's flight test, and the ship is on its suborbital trajectory. As you can see in some of the views and from some of the telemetry, we are in a little bit of a spin. We did spring a leak in some of the fuel tank systems inside of Starship, which a lot of those are used for your attitude control. And so at this point, we've essentially lost our attitude control with Starship. We are still on a path toward re-entry. We are suborbital, so no matter what, we are going to enter. However, this lowers the chances for it to be a controlled re-entry. So if you think back to Flight 3, when we had something similar happen, just the end symptom of a loss of attitude control, we were in a roll by the time we hit re-entry. So we are going to re-enter. We should hopefully still have views. The Starlink satellites are pretty robust to still maintaining contact. We've got 4 of those terminals on the vehicle, and they're pretty robust to maintaining contact even when we are in a spin, essentially. So we should hopefully continue to keep live views. It's going to still be dark until we get a little bit closer to entry, as we are a little bit, we're coming up on Africa. I believe we do swing just to the south of that continent. And by the time we start heading out over the Indian Ocean, we'll start heading into a sunrise. So not looking great with a lot of our on-orbit objectives for today, where we were hoping to do the PES deploy and relight an engine, and then really importantly get into that controlled entry to really put the heat shield through the ringer. Nonetheless, Starship marching forward towards that re-entry over the Indian Ocean, so we'll continue to hang with it and give you any updates as things continue to change.
And so, yeah, confirming some of the things that we've been discussing throughout the course of the broadcast, that the control of the vehicle is slipping away very much from SpaceX at this point, but they do note that the ship upper stage will be continuing to make its suborbital reentry. Not going to be able to do all the things that they wanted in exactly the fashion that they were hoping for. Steven, starting with you on this latest development with ship as we continue to see it spin, and this would be a great computer background if it weren't a tumbling, Block 3, which is, not striking out in the same way that the last two have, but this is yet another, notable miss for the Block 2 part of the Starship program.
Yes. I think SpaceX can take a small victory away from this, that they were able to get to SECO. They were able to reach the planned trajectory, although I'm not yet convinced it was a trouble-free ascent. Hopefully Elon goes ahead with his talk tonight and will address what we think we might have seen with fire potentially and an unusual SECO, and then some of the tumbling we saw early in the coast phase, and then it seemed to settle down, and now obviously it is the tumbling is more pronounced now. So that's it's a step forward, but I think at this point on Flight 9 for Starship, most people at SpaceX would want to be farther along in getting data on what Elon says is the most important thing, which is the heat shield, to make sure it is robust and rapidly reusable, which is what version 2 of Starship is all about. Is one of the big changes is in the heat shield on the ship, and we'll have to wait once again, probably a couple of months at least, for another flight, maybe longer. We'll see, before engineers have that data in hand.
Yeah, and just going back and looking at some of the earlier moments, and I'll see if I can bring a shot of this in just a second. Want to go back and look at the interior of the payload bay as we were looking inside ahead of, at that point, the planned deployment of the simulator Starlinks. Just getting a clip of that ready to talk over. But I have to imagine that we were all seeing that and thinking that it seemed quite odd. And Stephen, I start with you. I just wanted to see if you can speak to that little piece of the pie as we were, seeing some of the pieces of this mission dematerialize in a way that SpaceX was not hoping for. If you could address just the particulate that really happened to be building up. Actually, let's listen to
15 seconds into today's flight tests. You're seeing some flat movement here on the ship. If you've been following along, we have essentially lost attitude control on the ship at this point. It is suborbital, so it's still headed to the exact same trajectory as before. We were not able to get that payload door open and deploy those nose cones. We've been dealing with some leaks on the ship. This is also what led to that loss of attitude control. So at this point, we are kind of in a spin, and we are also going to be skipping that Raptor relight. If you've followed through the history of Starship, this something similar happened, different cause, but same symptom back on Flight 3, where we weren't able to maintain attitude control in orbit. And so we're going to skip the relight of that Raptor engine while we're in space. We are going to still proceed with entry, but as we are not able to control the attitude of the ship, as we get into entry, it will enter in whatever orientation it is in at the time, which does not bode well for the ship's heat shield, as we're not going to be essentially aligned the way that we want to do for reentry. So it is definitely coming down. It is definitely heading to the Indian Ocean, but our chances of making it all the way down are pretty slim. So we'll still get as much data as we can. We're still getting live telemetry, live views from Starlink the entire time, and we'll continue to stick with ship as it continues on. We are about 10 minutes away or so until we start getting into entry, and the light will start to pick up as we cross the Indian Ocean, and we'll start to see a little bit more daylight, and we'll, as always, as long as we maintain that comm link, get some plasma on the way in and start to bring the Starship back through the Earth's atmosphere. So that coming up in about 10 minutes or so. So we'll check back in with everybody in a little bit.
All right, so as you just heard, the relight cannot happen because the ship is tumbling, as we certainly suspected that would not be possible. But Stephen, to actually let you go ahead and talk about the particulate that we were seeing now in this replay clip from earlier on when we had those views inside the payload bay door.
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure what that is. It could be ice, it could be dust particles. It's really hard to tell from just one camera view. I suspect it's not. These are not parts or pieces that were inadvertently left behind inside the ship by the technicians. But yeah, it looks like snowflakes there. So possibly ice from the propellant tanks. Interested if Zach has any thoughts on what exactly that is. I don't
Yeah,
think
I'm
it's
not sure.
anything.
I'm not sure the way that they, if they insulate the header tanks, but I imagine there's ice on the header tanks. I don't know if they're fully isolated from the rest of the payload section, but I don't think they are. So that could just be ice from the actual header tanks. And you can actually see the forward dome down there, and there is no ice on the forward dome. So that could have been left over from the phase of flight where there was ice on the dome. And as the autogenous pressurization system is actually injecting gas back into the top of the dome, so it would thaw out rather quickly, but that ice could have been broken free during the actual boost phase of flight or during ignition. So yeah, fairly interesting. It definitely does look like ice though, instead of like actual debris of another kind.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Zach, and it'll be I'll be interested to see on version 3 once these things actually start flying real satellites, real payloads. I guess that's something they'll have to address to make sure that there's no way that any frost or ice from those header tanks can get down into the payload compartment.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see exactly how they address that milestone.
Yeah.
It's just
That's still a few flights away, though. We don't have to worry about that for a little bit because SpaceX has some other issues to work out, it seems.
Yeah. I was just taking a quick glance at Elon Musk's X account to see if there was any indication on whether or not he may be still planning to move forward with the talk in about 40 minutes or so. This mission obviously will be in the books at that point. I mean, the nominal timeline for splashdown was 1 hour and 6 minutes and 38 seconds. So we'll see with this aggressive tumbling that is put on display. If all continues to progress at this point, well, that's a fascinating angle.
They're coming up on 100 kilometers, so reentry is momentarily.
Yeah, and certainly not orienting the heat shield tiles as they would want.
The light shows start as Starship is getting closer to its reentry. If you're just tuning in, we were able to successfully make it to orbit. Run into a couple of issues as we've coasted to our entry point over the Indian Ocean. At this point, we had lost attitude control of the ship and entered into a spin. The team made the call to do what's called passivate the vehicle, so we're essentially venting all of the remaining propellant overboard, and it's going to make an uncontrolled reentry. Important to note, this is a contingency that is planned for, and we clear the zones in the Indian Ocean where these entries could take place. So we're not going to come down exactly where we would have had nothing happened, but we do clear a tremendous amount of space out in the Indian Ocean in the event that we run into this. We understand that there are always risks, essentially, with these flight tests, with the hardware, but we don't really accept any compromise when it comes to protecting people.
And it is one thing to note is we will actually still re-enter in our planned airspace zone, which is good. That is exactly what we planned for. You know, we do plan for if something does go a little bit off nominal, that we have enough airspace cleared out for situations just like this.
Yeah, re-entry is still just that really critical phase that we need to try and gather as much data, as much information as possible. Is a fully reusable heat shield has never been flown before in the history of space flight, and that's something that Starship still has to crack. And so we had a whole range of experiments on this one at this point, and we just started to lose some of our cameras, so it's very possible that we'll start to lose contact with Starship a lot sooner than we would have if it was a nominal reentry. So we are expecting it to break up essentially on its reentry over the Indian Ocean. So not able to do a lot of our on-orbit objectives today, but just the fact that we, got it into space was just a really big moment for a lot of the team.
Yeah, and another thing to note is that Super Heavy did fly for its second flight today. It first flew on Flight 7, and it made it all the way to our shutdown of all the engines and stage separation, getting ship into its suborbital trajectory today. It did ignite its 13 engines, but it did demise at that point. We did plan to fly it back down to Earth at a higher angle of attack, and we do expect it to stress the vehicle a lot more than what we've seen previously. So it's not unexpected that we did lose the booster before we got to the actual landing.
Yeah. So we're gonna continue to hang out and see if we get any updates on ship. It does look like we might be getting some video back soon. There we go. So this is a view essentially on the top part of Starship. You're looking up at the payload bay and towards the nose cone. So views are going to be a little bit scarce potentially, as again we are in essentially a tumble. We had lost that attitude control. So Starlink, when it's able to connect, able to feed this down. We are at the phase where we would expect entry to start within the next minute or so. So we are entering uncontrolled, but again, we're entering into an airspace and a sea space that is cleared and monitored in advance of launch and before we get to this phase.
And with the views that we are able to see, you are seeing a lot of that plasma build up. During reentry, we do expect the vehicle to see about 1400 degrees Celsius, and there you can see the flap feeling that temperature there, a little bit melting away. But as we expected with the spinning of the vehicle, we are no longer controlling the attitude of the vehicle. So this is now, at this point in the test flight, it is expected to see it begin to demise a little bit on its way back down to Earth.
Yeah, and so we'll stick with it for as long as we're kind of getting any reach back from the ship as it starts to make this reentry. But yeah, so it's re-entering actively right now. And again, we did do what's called passivation. So you essentially vent all of your excess propellant overboard before you hit the atmosphere. That's a safety measure we can take on the ship while you still have contact with it. So that was done. It's now coming down in the predetermined hazard area that was cleared ahead of flight. Not controlled, so we're not going to get all of that reentry data that we're still really looking forward to. This is kind of a new generation of ship. It has different flaps, improved heat shield, a whole lot of things that we're really trying to really put through the ringer, as there's a whole lot we still need to learn before we get to kind of the next step that we're hoping for, which is going to be that ship going orbital and eventually coming back here for a catch. So getting through one of these fully is going to be really important. It's not going to be today, but we are just going to stick with the ship, see what else we can learn as it makes its way through the atmosphere and brings an end to the 9th flight test. So we'll stick with it.
And as you have been hearing from SpaceX commentators, obviously falling short of the milestones that they were hoping to capture with this mission, but going to be continue to track it as the ship continues to re-enter. Appears that we're not getting any more telemetry data shared by SpaceX at this point, so they may have lost communication with the vehicle at this point in time and aren't able to update via the broadcast where the vehicle is in altitude. Actually, let's listen.
Just now joining us, we did have an on-time liftoff from Starbase, Texas at 6:30 p.m. Central Time of the Flight 9 vehicle. We did have some incredibly stressing objectives today. The Super Heavy booster flew for its second flight. It first flew on Flight 9 and made its way to take ship all the way up to stage separation, doing its second flight ever, which is pretty incredible. We did lose the booster on the way back down, as we did fly it back down at a higher angle of attack. So as expected, we did have it demise on the way back down.
Yeah, we were able to get all the way to that landing burn, though. So we made it through that higher angle of attack. So a lot of great data that's going to help us improve those future booster flights.
Yeah, we did do the directional flip, and it worked.
Yep.
It was actually
Flipped
a great
right
view
direction
that we saw. And then ship continued 6 healthy Raptor engines in the beginning of its flight, making it all the way to SECO and coasting for quite a while. We made it to the expected time that we would open up the payload door. Unfortunately, the door did not open as we expected it to, so we did not deploy the 8 Starlink satellites.
Yeah, we ran into a couple of issues once ship got there, but I can tell you it was a pretty crazy moment for a lot of the people that were standing here for ship to make it there. It's been a couple of flights, but it was really exciting to see. Ran into some issues on orbit. We weren't able to deploy the Starlinks. We eventually lost attitude control, dealing with some propellant links inside of the ship. And we did lose attitude control. And just to confirm, we did lose contact with the ship officially a couple of minutes ago. So that brings an end to the 9th flight test. So still a lot of work to do, but really big moment. Chris, how's everybody doing over there in Hawthorne? What's the vibes, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's a test program, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to learn, and that was definitely the vibe and the atmosphere here at Hawthorne. Would have been great to see ship get all the way through its objectives today, but with all of that data that came down through the Starlink system, we're definitely going to learn, and we're definitely going to fix that and push forward. Also, great to see the responsible engineers here in mission control, talking with the flight control teams in Starbase. We talked about how it's great having that expert knowledge on console to be able to go to at a moment's notice, and that really helped us make the right decisions in orbit today when we decided to passivate the vehicle. So we will be here looking forward to Flight 10 and some success on future flights.
And as it appears, SpaceX is getting ready to wrap up its coverage of Starship Flight 9. We'll keep an eye on it out of the corner of our eye, but it does seem as though things are wrapping up. So I want to go ahead and bring our guests back in to get your guys' final thoughts on, what we saw and, your prognosis of what this will mean for the Starship program moving forward. Zach of CSI Starbase, your final thoughts on Starship Flight 9, what happened and what didn't happen?
So, I mean, hate to just jump right into the speculation, but I guess that's what we're doing here. So, I mean, it seems like the solutions that they put in for trying to get the ship to SECO worked to the point where it actually successfully did reach SECO. However, we all observed those issues leading up to that moment of engine shutdown. So it seems like it improved the performance a little bit, but didn't necessarily resolve the issue. So that is something that I suppose is to be expected. I guess that really depends on what the actual issue was. So again, just staying on the same speculation I've been doing for the last month, if this is a harmonics related issue, which again, they said it was not for Flight 8, solving something like that could require multiple attempts. So I mean, sad to see, but the good news is they're clearly making progress. So I think this on Flight 10, we should probably expect to see even more progress. I am extremely interested to hear about what happened with the booster. I think that was definitely something that we may have been also potentially expecting a possibility of this happening, given that most of those engines, as far as we know, were also reflown on Flight 5. So those engines experienced a lot of warping during reentry, and they did again the second time during reentry as well. So it obviously seemed to not be too big of an issue during the ascent phase, but after putting that same stress on those engine nozzles again, I do wonder if that led to a rut of one of the center engines, because when we do see them lift the booster off of the launch mount after recovery, you can definitely tell that some of those engine nozzles are warped. So this is one of those things that I was wondering if would possibly become a problem. So we'll have to wait to see if they identify that as an issue, and that'll be interesting if it's just an inherent problem with those Raptors experiencing that kind of I guess damage multiple times in a row, if that is something that will be very hard for them to address in the future. And maybe it's possible that this is already being addressed on Raptor 3. But again, if it's the nozzles, I imagine there's maybe not too much difference between the nozzles on Raptor 2 and Raptor 3. So, this could be a challenge for them in the future. I mean, they have managed to obviously do this. What was the record? 28 times with Falcon 9. The reentry profile is a bit different. I don't think the aft section of Falcon 9 experiences the same heating during the landing phase as Super Heavy does. So it may be a unknown territory that they're experiencing for the first time in the program. So it will be interesting to see how they address this. I really hope we get more information on that specifically.
Well, thank you again so much, Zach. And of course, for folks out there, if you'd like to continue to follow Zach's great work over at CSI Starbase, you can find him right here on YouTube at just searching CSI Starbase, or you can find him on X as well. Zach, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate you being with us for Flight 9.
Yeah, of course. And just be on the lookout. Do have some more videos on the way. I was originally working on a 3-part series, which is now turned into a 5-part series about Stage 0. So probably be covering the Massey's Flame Trench next, followed by the Pad B Flame Trench, and then Pad B launch mount after that. So should be a fun series of episodes coming up.
Looking forward to it. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And Stephen Clark, space reporter at Ars Technica, bringing you in for your final thoughts on Starship Flight 9. As we just were talking about with Zach, obviously made some progress with the ship upper stage, but ran into some really key hiccups that they're going to have to drill down into now.
Yes, indeed, Will. I'll echo a lot of what Zach said. I'm really interested to hear what the data said or data indicated late in the ascent burn on the ship when we were seeing what looked to be a fire. Was that what we were really seeing? Did it make it to SECO and its planned trajectory just barely, so to speak, or was it a problem-free ascent and we just didn't know what we were looking at, in the sense of there were some changes with a purge and some other changes that engineers made for this flight. So we would expect some differences in what we were seeing from previous Starship flights, but didn't look to me that it was entirely problem-free. So again, they may have patched up some of the leaks or the symptoms of the problem, but may not have solved the fundamental issue, whether it's the harmonics, vibrations, or something else. However, I think that the outcome of this flight really ratchets up the importance and anticipation for Raptor 3 and the version 3 of Starship. That's the vehicle that SpaceX has designed and is going to be relying on to do missions with the Starship, whether it's deploying Starlink satellites, refueling in low Earth orbit, going to the moon, Mars, and doing other types of missions down the road. And if version 3 comes along and it works swimmingly without a problem, version 3 will just be a bump on the road in the story of Starship. So my colleague Eric Berger at Ars Technica had a chance to chat with Elon Musk for a few minutes this afternoon, and he mentioned Raptor 3, the upgraded engine that supposedly, according to SpaceX, it will include permanent fixes to these issues that have been causing these setbacks for Starship in the last few months. Raptor 3 will begin flying at the end of the year. So we'll see how many more flights of version 2 with Raptor 2 engines SpaceX can pull off before then, maybe a handful before they move on to version 3. And as we were talking about early on in the broadcast this evening, Zach was mentioning moving on to Pad B as well, perhaps in a few flights' time. So I think that is going to be a big moment for SpaceX, and really can't come soon enough if version 3 does indeed include and have the fixes for these issues that SpaceX has been encountering with version 2 over the last few months.
Yeah, it'll be certainly something to watch, seeing that pad come online. And like Eric was reporting, the Raptor 3s coming in at the end of the year if that timeline continues to hold. Lots to come with the Starship program. Just one little note here. Does appear as though SpaceX has taken down the page that was keying up the To Make Life Multiplanetary talk with Elon Musk. So it's not entirely clear if that talk is still going to be happening tonight or if plans have changed in that direction. We'll, of course, keep tabs on that and bring that to you if it does, in fact, happen. But, Stephen, thanks so much for joining us for Starship Flight 9. Look forward to talking with you again in the near future.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And, of course, folks can follow Stephen and Eric's work over at Ars Technica by just simply going to the Ars Technica website, arstechnica.com/space. You can find all of their articles there. You can also follow him also on X, simply at Stephen Clark 1. Want to go to a couple of comments that we got from SpaceX within the last few minutes here. Just making a couple of remarks in the aftermath of this mission. We'll go to this first tweet here coming in about 7 minutes or so ago. read it verbatim for those who may not be watching the screen or have the ability to watch right now. SpaceX says, and I quote, "First reflight of a Super Heavy booster. Today's test objectives were designed to intentionally push Super Heavy to the limits, giving us real-world data about its performance that will directly feed into the making next-generation booster even more capable. As it is standard for every test, the area in the Gulf containing the booster's flight path was cleared prior to launch." And of course, being a reference to the Super Heavy booster not being able to complete its planned landing burn in the manner that it was intending. Finally, the most recent update from SpaceX, they say, quote, "As if the flight test was not exciting enough, Starship experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly. Teams will continue to review data and work toward our next flight test. With a test like this, success comes from what we learn, and today's test will help us improve Starship's reliability as SpaceX seeks to make life multiplanetary." End quote. And as I just mentioned, given that it does appear that SpaceX has taken down the page indicating the talk from Elon Musk, we're likely, well, let me not jump ahead of my skis here. There's a chance that he may not be making the talk tonight, which most recently was scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern. So about 20 minutes from now, it's still potentially could be happening later. They just said after Starship Flight 9, and SpaceX didn't announce the 9 p.m. Eastern start time, but that was when their live stream was scheduled to begin. As we take one last look back here at the tower there at Pad A, we'll have to wait and see how long it'll take before SpaceX is ready to come back again for Starship Flight 10. We'll see what the FAA says about this flight, as the ship upper stage sounds like we'll be making a splashdown in the Indian Ocean, though not exactly where SpaceX had wanted to put it, but was along their intended flight path by the words of the SpaceX commentators. And so we'll see if this has once again triggered another mishap investigation, and what the timeline will be like for SpaceX to get back to the pad with this mission. One other note about Starship Flight 8, while a public safety determination was made to allow Starship Flight 9 to go forward, the full mishap investigation into the issues on Flight 8, according to the FAA, are still in work. So we'll also be looking out for a resolution to that mishap investigation in the weeks and potentially months to come. Of course, SpaceX isn't done with their rapid launch schedule, launching from Vandenberg this morning, from Starbase this evening, and tomorrow morning, as we're looking out at Historic Launch Complex 39A. You can see the Falcon 9 still in the horizontal position as SpaceX is preparing to launch its upcoming batch of Starlink V2 mini satellites. That'll be Starlink 10-32, with launch time currently scheduled for 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 13:30 UTC for our friends around the world. So, no rest for the weary at SpaceX, as they've got more launches planned and ones coming up on their belt right around the corner. As we're winding down our coverage, I want to give a big thank you to, first off, all of our wonderful moderators, both for Spaceflight Now and for LabPadre, who have been working hard in the live chat to help keep these environments good and sociable for people to pop in, give their thoughts and opinions on Flight 9 and other happenings in the realm of space and spaceflight. Big thanks to Lab, to Chief, to Lucid, and all the folks who work extremely hard at LabPadre, bring us views like this one here, looking back at Starship Launch Tower, and also plenty of views all around the Starbase facilities, now in the incorporated city of Starbase. Want to also thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running some of the technical operations of this side of the broadcast. Thankfully, the X stream was less combative than it was for Starlink 17-1 out of Vandenberg, so thank goodness for that. And so for all of us here, for the entire team at LabPadre, for the team at Spaceflight Now, Emil Robinson-Smith, thank you for spending part of your Tuesday evening with us, and we look forward to bringing you live, robust coverage of the Starship program when next they're ready to fly. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. For all of us here, good night and take care.